Hello guys, this is What If Naruto Was Obito Student Part 2. I hope you will enjoy. Good morning, Obito. Rin greeted me, opening the door to her apartment to let me in. Unlike every previous time that I had come here, I was finally able to knock immediately upon arriving. None of that debating back and forth whether to go through with it or run away crap that had become customary. It wasn't a huge step by any means, and no one even knew about it but myself, but I was proud of the small growth all the same. Baby steps. Those were important right now. Morning, Rin. I returned her greeting, stepping inside and taking my sandals off. Is everything okay after? I didn't finish the thought, but she no doubt knew what I was asking about. Although there was a lot to digest with what had happened last night. Our former classmate, Gecko Hayate, was dead. Murdered by an unknown assailant. I was never really close to him, and I don't believe Rin had been either, but he was still an ally of ours. One we used to go to school with every day. A man we had trusted our backs to on the battlefield. For him to be done in while within the borders of our own home, it was almost like some kind of bad joke. The problems didn't stop there. Rin, Naruto, and I had been witness to the Hidden Sands Jinchuriki as he partially transformed, letting his tailed beast out, temporary though as it may have been. There was no telling how many others had seen it, but the more distressing possibility was if someone had seen us. We very well might have targets on our backs now, so we couldn't be too careful. Going by Rin's sullen manner at the moment, everything appeared fine and no problems had arisen yet, thankfully. She smiled gently at me and nodded ever so briefly. I finished the initial autopsy fairly quickly. It's as you probably suspected, but a futon jutsu was what caused those wounds that killed him. I left the more detailed autopsy to the night staff so I could hurry up and bring Naruto home. Sorry if we missed you when you came back. I shook my head to her apology. It's fine. You did the right thing. How is Naruto? I asked. He had been pretty shaken up when I left him. I was guessing he had gone into shock, but there was no real way for me to judge that on the little time I had spent with him. Rin was far more adept at diagnosing those types of things, which she had to be, considering her profession. To my question, Rin could only smirk. See for yourself, she said. The two of us had walked into the kitchen as we were talking. Rin had prepared a mountain of food, possibly in an attempt to cheer Naruto up. Not that he looked to be in the need of any kind of boost. He was the same as always, inhaling anything and everything he could get his hands on. It didn't matter what it was, if it was within range of his grubby little hands it was getting shoveled into his mouth. Ah, Obito-senpai. Good morning. At least, I'm pretty sure that was what he said. It was kind of hard to tell with all the food in his mouth as he talked. Now that he had taken notice of me, however, his hands paused and he finished swallowing the rest of his food before continuing. Finally came around to apologize to me, huh? This little brat. I couldn't stop myself from chuckling awkwardly as I pulled out a chair and sat down opposite of him. It was a little cumbersome with the stack of food between us, but I wasn't looking to make the perfect apology anyways. Yeah, sorry it took me so long to come around. Well, I'm sorry for a lot of things, but that too. I started to try and get the words out of my mouth, but Naruto suddenly held a hand up to cut me off. I'ma go first, if that's okay? He said, surprising me. Thing is, Nachan told me a little about it last night, and I guess I realized you got a lot going on too, you know. I shot Rin a look, but she only shrugged unapologetically. Part of me really wanted to know what exactly it was she told him, but most of me decided it was better I didn't know. So long as it got Naruto off my back, it was fine. Anyways, you already told me you were sorry last night. After you saved my ass too. It's kinda embarrassing to admit, but I just completely froze up against that guy, you know. That was one thing no one could blame Naruto for. It must have been an incredible shock to him, meeting another Jinchuriki from a different village. One that was as unstable as Gaara appeared to be no less. I could only imagine how upsetting that kind of stuff must be, and on a day I'd upset him plenty enough already. It's fine, I assured him. So you and I are good then? It would be really easy on me if that was the case. I know he must also want to go back to training, and I would admit it, I had kind of grown to enjoy watching over him as he improved too. Despite having been so reluctant to start training him at the start. Of course, I would never admit any of this out loud. It was way too embarrassing, and I felt like I would lose some kind of game or bet if people found out I felt this way. Never mind the fact that Rin almost definitely already knew. Well. Naruto leaned back in his chair, placing both hands behind his head. I wouldn't go so far as to say you and I are good, you know. Figures it wouldn't be that easy. At least, that's what I thought until the next thing Naruto said. Tell you what, you teach me the huge Ketan Jutsu you used to fend off the sand monster and I'll let you off the hook, deal? I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. Perhaps the hardest I had in a long time. W what? You got a problem? Naruto jumped to his feet, slamming his hands on the table. It looked like he was legitimately angry for several seconds, but even he couldn't keep it up in the face of my continuous laughter. Before long even he started giggling, although a little more awkwardly. I'll tell you what, Naruto, I said, finally managing to calm down at least a little. You ever master the ability to distort reality by opening a portal to an alternate dimension, you let me know. Then I'll teach you that jutsu I used last night. Short of that, I don't think he or anyone else for that matter was going to be learning that jutsu I had personally created. Maybe Kakashi could do it, but he was about it. Is that a yes? The sarcasm of my comment flew completely over Naruto's head. Although I shouldn't have been surprised. This time even Rin couldn't help but giggle at her adopted son. It's more of a someday kind of answer, really. I said. You never know, Naruto had the strongest of all the tailed beasts sealed inside of him. Who knew what kind of crazy things he might be capable of one day in the future? Never say never. For now, why don't you think of something else? I'll do my part to make it up to you, it just has to be within reason. I owe you that much, since yesterday was mostly my fault. Again with the mostly crap, but all right. Naruto grumbled, but at least appeared to be partially satisfied as he sat back down. Not like I got much choice, I need someone to train me, and I'll acknowledge it, you're strong, you know. I've never seen Kakashi-sensei use a jutsu nearly that powerful. Well, I would certainly hope not. Naruto didn't seem to realize it, but Jonin didn't simply throw around powerful jutsu because we could. He and I had been in a pretty desperate situation last night, which is why I resorted to such measures. I had no doubt Kakashi had a jutsu or a dozen of his own around that level. He was the famous copy ninja who had stolen over 1,000 jutsu, after all. How about, Rin suggested. The two of you forget about the training for today? The look on Naruto's face immediately told us both what he thought of that idea, but she ignored him. Yesterday was pretty taxing on all of us, and I think we should decompress. So how about we go to one of the festivals being held in the village? There's all sorts of events in celebration of the exams, so we should be able to find plenty to do to keep us busy. What do you say? She looked at me. A festival. I couldn't say I looked forward to the idea of being in crowds of people. I used to love going to them as a kid, but I didn't really like the attention my scarred face got when we were in crowds of mostly civilians. Even so, I had to try and change it up at least a little. No, less of a change and more of going back to how I used to be. I suppose that might be a good idea. Naruto suddenly started snickering, a huge shit-eating grin covering his face from ear to ear. I just thought of how Obito-senpai can pay me back. I had the terrible feeling in my gut that I wasn't about to like where this is going. You have to pay for all my snacks at the festival today, you know. And no limit this time, Nachan. It's his punishment. Geez. Rin rolled her eyes, but nodded and then flashed me an apologetic grin. Sorry, Obito, but do your best today, okay? She held up both fists as if to cheer me on. He can't possibly eat that much after going through all of this. I looked down at the mountain of food Naruto had already half cleared. If he could keep going after eating all of this, he wasn't human. I then also remembered he did have a monster fox in his stomach. It wasn't possible that thing helped him eat. Right? I was wrong. So very wrong about how much Naruto was capable of eating. And now my poor wallet was the one paying the price. Takoyaki, taiyaki, okonomiyaki, kushikatsu, teriniku, gyoza, machi dango, fucking pie. There was no limit to the number of different assortments of snacks and food being served up at the various stalls. And Naruto needed to have all of it. It didn't matter if he wasn't finished with the thing I had only just bought for him, the moment he saw something else he wanted and he just added that to the growing pile in his arms. When it got to the point he couldn't carry anymore while eating at the same time, then Rin and I were left to pick up everything else. Delicious! Naruto exclaimed, biting down on like 3 different types of meat skewered on sticks at once. I don't even think he knew what was going in his mouth anymore. So good. Nachan, you have to try this. He extended one of the half-eaten sticks in Rin's general direction. The two of us walked behind him, arms already full of his food, which we were absolutely forbidden under any circumstances to eat unless he offered something to us directly. Thank you, Naruto. Rin leaned forward, unable to grab the stick herself, and so just took a bite of it directly from Naruto's hand. Her eyes immediately lit up upon getting a taste. You're right, it is good. As you may have guessed by now, I hadn't been offered a single bite of anything yet. Vindictive little twerp. Not that I could say I didn't deserve it, which is why I was content to silently put up with it until now. Just went to show that despite his rather flowery words this morning, the kid did hold a grudge. I just hoped that with this we would finally be square. Ooh. What's that? Naruto suddenly took off, something else having caught his eye deep among the crowds of people. We couldn't possibly chase after him, and so the two of us were temporarily left behind. Although I had no doubt he would return soon. If it turned out to be something he wanted, then he was going to need my money after all. The 3 of us must have made quite the image. Rin and I with our arms packed full of food and Naruto adding more and more to the piles. It certainly garnered a lot of attention, and yet for the first time in a long while I found I didn't mind so much. The thing was, this wasn't the typical negative attention I had gotten used to. Instead of the horrified grimaces people made when they saw my face, or the sneers of contempt when they saw either Jinchuriki, people looked at us and smiled, some of them laughed even. It was kinda nice. This feeling. Here, Obito. Rin whispered, leaning towards me as she held up a piece of taiyaki. Quickly, while he's gone. Her hushed urgency caused me to chuckle. I hate to think of what punishment was in store for us if we got caught, but there was no time to think about it. Ordinarily, I might have resisted the urge to eat anything, but the cacophony of delicious smells was too much, so screw it. I didn't even care how awkward it was to even successfully take the taiyaki from her. She couldn't exactly hold it very high with her arms full the way they were, and I couldn't get a hand free to take anything. So I just had to lean over, taking a bite of it at a time right out of Rin's hand. Damn good. I couldn't help but praise, savoring the delicious custard filling inside. It wasn't just the taste that made this the best damn taiyaki I ever had in my life. For starters, it had been forever since I had one. Then being subjected to all these delicious smells that I was forbidden from eating made the taboo of it taste all the more better. Let's not even talk about the fact that Rin was literally hand-feeding it to me. I could die and crumble into 1,000 tiny pieces right now, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't mind. Nei-chan. Obito-senpai. I finished just in time too, Naruto calling out to us as Rin crumpled the wrapper up and hid it amidst the pile so he wouldn't notice. This way, this way. Hurry. I found Sakura-chan. It would appear it hadn't been more food he had seen in the crowd, but rather an acquaintance of his. Sakura-chan, as in his teammate, Haruno Sakura? I asked, looking over to Rin as the two of us followed after him. I had done a bit of my research when it was decided I would take on his training, so I knew at least enough about his team and mission accomplishments. Although I had yet to meet the last member that comprised the Kakashi-led Squad 7. That's the one. Rin nodded, making a somewhat complicated expression. Before I could ask her what it was, she leaned a little closer again to whisper, Naruto has got kind of a thing for her. So no matter what you hear, just kind of play along, okay? Just what exactly was it that she thought I was going to hear? I didn't get to ask, because we had caught up to Naruto and he was already pulling us along, the increased speed threatening to send all his food flying to the streets. Sakura-chan. Yet it would seem Naruto didn't care about his food anymore. The food I paid for, mind you. Instead, he was too busy trying to flag his teammate down. I almost wondered how he found her in this thicket of people in the first place before her conspicuous pink hair also caught my eye. Sakura's head perked up at hearing her name called, and she started scanning the crowd. Next to her was some blonde girl that looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't say I recognized her. She was the one who spotted us first, tugging at Sakura's arm and pointing to us as we approached. Watching the barrage of emotions clearly flash across her face was almost comical, if not a little worrying that a kunoichi would wear her thoughts so visibly as she did. While looking for us, she had been curious as to who would be calling out for her, but not just that. It was also hopeful, as if she had been waiting for someone in particular. The moment her eyes fell on the familiar characteristics of Naruto, however, her face filled with disgust. It certainly looked that way, but it was quickly replaced by just standard disappointment. This wasn't much better, but compared to that brief second before, and it was a definite step in the right direction. After that, though, followed concern and anger. She took a step towards Naruto just as he was nearly upon her. An instant before it happened, I knew what was about to occur. Because I had seen that same look and stance in Naruto's mother before she did the exact same thing. Sakura-Naruto never got any farther than that, a fist drilling into his cheek and sending him flying. Along with all the food he had been holding, which went splashing into the crowds. So much for all my hard-earned money. You idiot. I've been trying to contact you for over a week now. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? Well, at least that punch had been one out of concern for her teammate. That kind of made it okay, I guess. Seemed counterproductive to me, but who was I to judge? I was still more devastated about all the snacks I had bought. Festival food wasn't cheap, damn it. Wait. Sakura-chan, calm down for a second, you know. Naruto was scooting backwards, still prone on the street pavement. Sakura, meanwhile, continued to stalk towards him, looking like she might slug him again. You want me to calm down after you, Kakashi-sensei, and Sasuke-kun all just up and disappeared? Not a single one of you told me where you were going. Sakura bent down and grabbed him by the scruff of his jacket, hoisting him back to his feet. Unexpectedly strong, considering her stature. I had to ask your sister at the hospital, and she said you were going on some training trip. What? I turned to Rin, who was suddenly not willing to meet my eye line, or Naruto's for that matter. I was kind of starting to see what was going on here, however. Naruto was her adoptive son, after all. It makes sense she might not take too kindly to the first girl he ended up developing a crush on, especially one as violent as Sakura appeared. Damn it, Naruto. Why did you have to pick someone so much like your mother? I also understood that this was what Rin meant when she was asking me to play along. She must have lied to Sakura about where Naruto was going to be so she wouldn't come checking at their home for him. Now I was the one who was going to have to end up authenticating that story. Not seeing much choice now, I sighed and walked up to the two of them as I resigned myself to doing what needed to be done. Why yo? I called out to them. Sakura whirled on me, nose still flaring and eyes drilling into my head as if asking who would dare interrupt her in the middle of her tirade. Of course, that angry look disappeared immediately the second she got a good look at my face. Sorry about this, I said. It would appear I've caused some kind of misunderstanding. I'm Uchiha Obito, Kakashi's former teammate. He asked me to train Naruto for the exams. So for all the worry, I apologize. I inclined my head. It would seem I had been apologizing for a lot of things lately. Although I'm pretty sure this one wasn't actually my fault. Uchiha? Sakura whispered under her breath. When I looked back up, she quickly shook it off, probably hoping I didn't hear her. No. What I meant to say is my name is Haruno Sakura. Thank you for looking after Naruto. She dropped her teammate who crumpled to a heap on the floor, bowing to me at a near 90-degree angle. I'm sure he's caused you all kinds of problems, but please continue to take care of him. Now I see. Her words were certainly proper and she acted docile in front of adults. This wasn't her true personality, however. No, when she slugged Naruto just now was far closer to her typical self than this suddenly picturesque girl in front of me was. No wonder Rin couldn't stand her. I don't think there was anything that pissed her off more than people who hid things, never mind to the degree in which Sakura hid her entire self behind this charade. All the same, that wasn't my problem and I wasn't looking to make waves here. So I just smiled and nodded back. Same here. Please continue to care for Naruto as a teammate. He's lucky to have someone that cares for him as much as you do. As I finished speaking, Sakura stood back up straight and smiled sweetly at me, clearly buying into my words as I had also appeared to have bought into hers. With the pleasantries out of the way, Sakura seemed to have other thoughts now. There was a sudden blush on her face, eyes darting this way and that. It kind of reminded me of how all the girls used to act around Kakashi. Since you're also an Uchiha and everything, I was just wondering, do you happen to know where Sasuke is at the moment? She ended up gazing at her feet as she finished her question. Meanwhile, Naruto sat cross-legged on the street, making a complicated expression back up at her. These kids really were just like we had been at that age. So much so it physically hurt to look at them. For his own safety, even I don't know where he is right now. I paused, debating how much more to tell her. For all her faults, she seemed like a smart girl. I had read her report on the encounter with Orochimaru and the Sound's Genin as well, so she wasn't completely out of the loop either. Even so, for her own sake, it was best to just keep things simple and put her mind at ease. You have nothing to worry about. Kakashi is with him. There's no one better that can keep Sasuke safe. I smiled at both her and Naruto. I know he had been worried this whole time too, so my words had been to reassure them both. Well, that's a bummer. The blonde girl Sakura had been with Sid as she took her place next to her friend. Here I was finally hoping we would get some good info on where Sasuke-kun is. It would appear like his brother before him and Kakashi during our time, Sasuke was the object of many a woman's affection. The girl then smiled at me, bowing as Sakura just had before. My name is Yamanaka Ino. I'm on Squad 10 under Sarutobi Asuma-sensei. Pleased to meet you. I returned the greeting, now knowing why she seemed familiar as a member of the famed Yamanaka clan. The heiress no less. Naruto's class appeared to be full of all kinds of talented individuals. Looks like you've gotten introduced to everyone then, Obito. Rin walked up next to me and inclined her head to the two girls as well. Good to see you again, Ino-chan, Sakura-chan. She greeted the girls who only just now noticed she was here as well. After that she smiled at me gently, eyes thanking me for having covered for her story just now. I returned the smile back, just happy to be of use to her for once. How sweet, Ino said, looking back and forth between Naruto and us. Naruto, you've never introduced us to your sister's boyfriend. How come you never mentioned your other guardian was an Uchiha? Boyfriend? Naruto asked, looking confused as he finally stood up, dusting the dirt from his pants. He then looked up at my quickly reddening face. Then at Rin. Then back at me, before suddenly laughing. No. Obito-senpai and Nei-chan aren't like that, you know. That so? Even Sakura looked like she wasn't quite convinced, looking at all the food Rin and I held suspiciously, as if it was somehow proof of anything. You do have to admit, the three of you kind of look like a family all together like this. I might have even believed they were your birth parents if I didn't know you. That's enough of that. I finally blurted out, not able to take it anymore. Seriously, these kids were going to give me a heart attack if they kept saying things like that. Rin wasn't helping, just standing there and giggling next to me, like she was enjoying some inside joke. Naruto, why don't you share some of this with Sakura-san and Ino-san? I dumped all the snacks I was holding into Naruto's still empty arms. He took it without complaint, but neither girl seemed like they wanted any of it. Fortunately for me, Ino already seemed interested in something else as her eyes landed on someone in the crowd. Speaking of juicy dating details. She smirked, standing on her toes and raising a hand over her head to be more easily seen. Asuma-sensei. Kurenai-sensei. Over here. It would appear our little gathering was about to increase in number again. This time it was two more former classmates of mine that approached us. Sarutobi Asuma, one of the sons of the third Hokage himself, and Yuhi Kurenai. Both of them had a student that would be fighting in the finals. It was Ino that had called them over, but as they approached the first thing they seemed to notice was me. Oh, Obito. Asuma grinned at me, extending a hand for me to shake. I didn't know you were back. You should have said something. Obito-kun. Kurenai greeted at the same time, inclining her head. It's good to see you. Likewise, you too. I grinned apologetically at them, but before I could say anything more on it, Ino butted back in. What the heck, you all already know each other. How boring. She lamented, probably just disappointed she hadn't been able to get any kind of juicy drama out of the situation. Just because I wasn't able to provide her with any additional ammo didn't mean there wasn't any to be found, however, as she grinned at the two newcomers. So what's this, Asuma-sensei? You should have told me if you were dating Kurenai-sensei. I would have recommended some flowers. Why no? It's not like that. Asuma quickly tried to refute her, cheeks tinting red. Finally, it wasn't just me at the end of these kinds of jokes. Although it was kind of looking like there was some tinge of truth to this one, even Kurenai blushing and looking away from everyone. No way, sensei. Don't be like that, you'll make Kurenai-sensei sad. Ino's grin reminded me of the same one Jiraiya always made. You and Obito-san should be more happy. Having two beautiful ladies to take on dates. Hey sensei, why don't you bring Obito-san to my family's shop sometime? I'll pick out the perfect bouquet for both of you. Figures I wasn't going to get out of this for long. I need a drink. Asuma grumbled, making eye contact with me out of the corner of his eye. He nodded his head towards a stall not far from us, and I was quick to nod back. No time like the present to run away. You want anything, Rin? I asked, but she shook her head. Kurenai was already helping her take some of the snacks I had bought earlier, and the two of them were splitting a boat of takoyaki now. Kurenai-chan and I are going to catch up. You boys have fun. We'll be here when you get back. Rin smiled at me before turning her attention back to Kurenai. The two of them were already giggling about something, but I had no interest in finding out about what. Boo! Don't run away! Ino shouted after Asuma and I as we quickly did just that and made our retreat. Too bad it didn't look like she was going anywhere either. Her, Sakura, and Naruto also gathered around Rin and Kurenai. I almost felt bad leaving Naruto with all the women, but he didn't seem to mind. I think he was just happy to be with his crush, Sakura. Sorry about that, she's a handful. Asuma started as we reached the stall. He ordered a can of beer and grabbed 2 plastic cups. Splitting the can between us, we knocked our cups together before taking a sip. No worries, I said, shaking my head to his apology. I've been looking after Naruto in place of Kakashi for this past week, so I know a thing or two about handfuls myself. To make no mention of how much of a handful I had been as a kid. Yeah? That so? Asuma asked, seemingly surprised by the news. No wonder you didn't have time to let anyone know you were back. He took another sip of his cup, the two of us now leaning against the side of the stall and looking back at the group we had just temporarily left. I probably don't need to tell you then that my own team Shikamaru will be fighting in the tournament. I nodded to the question. If things went well enough in their first fights, Naruto and Shikamaru would be up against each other in the second round of the tournament. It was entirely possible our two students would end up duking it out. Although things like who won or lost were ultimately irrelevant in the Chunin exams, as your promotion was only based on performance, there was certainly a sense of competitive spirit that tournaments always seemed to invoke in people. I wasn't immune to such things myself, and I had only been invested in Naruto for a week so far. Must be nice to have a kid actually excited to get in there and prove himself. Asuma sighed, pulling out a box of cigarettes. He offered me a stick, but I shook my head, settling for just a beer for the time being. That punk Shikamaru is so lazy. I wouldn't be surprised if he just ends up looking for the first chance to forfeit. I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering how Naruto had said something similar about his former classmate. Well, Naruto and I have our own problems. I admitted, taking another sip as I remembered our fight yesterday. It certainly isn't easy being a teacher, I'm realizing. I have respect for all of you who actually volunteered to do it. Taking on genin teams and everything. I don't know if I could handle 3 of them. Naruto by himself is plenty. To this, Asuma could only laugh. Man, you said it. He agreed. I have no idea what I was thinking. After that, a brief but comfortable silence settled between us. It didn't last long as Asuma suddenly nudged me in the shoulder, making a face similar to the one his student had just been making earlier. So give me the details. You and Rin finally hooked up or what? You've been pining after her for years. He just had to wait until I was taking another sip of my cup to ask this, the sudden topic change causing me to choke on my beer and send me into a fit of coughs. Why do I have to keep telling people we're not like that? I shouted at him, but he only laughed. Look, I gave up on Rin a long time ago, okay? After she started dating Kakashi. Seriously, man? Asuma seemed genuinely surprised by this news. You know those two only dated for what? Not even a year? It was so long ago I barely even remember. There was no real chemistry there and they both figured it out pretty quickly. That was your chance, although I don't think it's gone yet. Not many guys go looking to date a Jinchuriki or a single mother. You have literally no competition. It's complicated, all right. I really couldn't tell him anything more than that. The reasons I shouldn't go out with Rin were long enough as it was, but that all just didn't mean anything in the face of one simple truth: Rin didn't see me that way. She never had. I was just her childhood friend, and I think it was impossible for her to see me as anything more than that. Certainly, I used to misread the signs it felt like she was giving out when we were younger as romantic interest, but I knew enough now as an adult that it was just how Rin was. To this Asuma just shrugged. Your loss. But seriously, you need to get some experience with women or something, or you're always going to end up like this. I really didn't want to hear that from him after he got all flustered when his own student called him out for being on his own date. Before I could tell him just that, however, a large arm draped over either of our shoulders and Jiraiya's head popped up between us. Thank you, Asuma. I've been trying to tell him that this whole time. My master lamented with a booming voice. Maybe he'll finally listen, hearing it from someone his own age. Jiraiya-sama. Asuma dropped his cigarette in surprise, having barely gotten to take more than a couple inhales of it. I guess I should have figured with Obito back that you would be too. He looked down sadly at his fallen cigarette, as if mourning a lost brother. I don't suppose you came to drink with us, master? I asked him, holding up the now mostly empty plastic cup. Or maybe. My one eye turned over to Naruto. None of them seemed to realize Jiraiya was here yet, but only Kurenai and Rin were likely to recognize him anyways. Jiraiya wasn't exactly in the village much, so it seemed highly unlikely any of the younger generation would realize who he was at a glance, although they no doubt had heard of him. This extended to even Naruto. Despite the fact that Minato-sensei had named Jiraiya his godfather, Naruto's own name came from the main character of Jiraiya's first published book. Yet despite that, they had never met. I never questioned my master on this fact, because honestly I understood even without needing to be told. He was surely facing his own kinds of guilt, in the same way I was. No. Jiraiya shook his head, tone turning rarely serious. I actually came because I have a favor to ask you, Obito. As he said that, Asuma seemed to realize the possible secretive nature of any kind of talk between my master and I, so he excused himself to rejoin the others. As he joined them, Rin took notice of Jiraiya. She shifted her position slightly, just enough to keep Naruto from accidentally glancing this way and seeing us together. You really should listen to Asuma, don't you think? Jiraiya grinned at me, also staring at Rin. She's grown into a fine woman. You'd be an even bigger idiot than I thought you were not to try and make another move on that. Get to the point, master. I growled at him, not looking to rehash this conversation yet again. All right, geez. Jiraiya held up his hands as if to ward off a wild animal. You were more fun drunk the other night, you know that? I didn't bother to inform him that was generally true with most people, instead staring at him until he would finally get serious again. Speaking of the other night, I think I finally found a lead on the red-haired man you saw. You did. I couldn't even mask my own surprise. I had given Jiraiya almost nothing to go on other than he had red hair and an intimidating presence. Yet with just that he had been able to get a lead on him? It just went to show, when my master got serious he could really do some amazing things. Here's the thing though, he's a powerful adversary. One I'm hoping I don't have to fight, but if it comes down to it, there's no guarantee things go well for me. Wait, what was my master saying? He was going to go take this guy on? But why? I had so many questions, but I also learned a long time ago, if Jiraiya wanted you to know, he would tell you. Well, I don't expect to get done in or anything, so don't worry about that. He must have noticed my concern, suddenly bursting into laughter to calm me even a little. That laughter ended almost as quickly as it began. So here's the deal. I might be gone for a while. So in my absence, I need you to hold on to something for me. Can I count on you to do that? I nodded without thinking, but in hindsight, I probably should have known better than to do that because a moment later, great. Come on out, Giratora. The toad that contained the key to Naruto's seal came flying out from behind my master's back. I still don't agree with this, but it can't be helped, Giratora said, looking me up and down. Of course, the two of us had met before and I had even put my fingerprints on his seal, but this? If something ever went wrong with Naruto's seal, Giratora here was the only surefire way to fix it. It would enable even an amateur like me to do something about it if I had him in hand. That's because right now, despite his body being compact, he could elongate and unroll his stomach into a scroll. Minato-sensei himself placed this key onto that scroll. To now entrust it to me in case of an emergency? I also don't think this is such a good idea, I said, trying to take a couple steps away from Jiraiya and Giratora while I still could. Thing is, to store Giratora for use, there was only one method, and that was, well, you had to swallow him. Especially seeing as I was forbidden from a toad contract, this was the only way to ensure I could utilize him if it became a necessity. Now, don't be like that, Obito. Jiraiya grinned at me, but it wasn't a comforting sight. I hear you and Naruto have been getting along pretty well lately. Even had your first fight and already made up the day after. He really did hear everything that went on, somehow. Part of me wondered if he hadn't planted some tadpoles on me or something. No, really. I'm going to pass. I took a couple steps further back. To this, my master could only sigh. Well, can't be helped. For a moment I was foolish enough to believe that meant he was going to let me off the hook. That hope disappeared when his smile returned twice as large as before. I was going to do this the easy way, but you leave me no choice. That's okay, this is a festival after all, no better place for a show. Wait, what do you dash? There was no further time for questioning than that, two loud pops and smoke appearing on either side of me. From the smoke 2 adult human-sized toads appeared. A direct result of Jiraiya's summoning jutsu, but I didn't even see him prepare the jutsu. The loud noise and smoke from their arrival immediately drew a crowd, surrounding my master and me in a large semicircle. Ladies and gentlemen, Jiraiya had slipped on a pair of fake glasses with a mustache attached to them in the split second I was distracted by the toads, not bothering to do anything more than that to hide his appearance. Watch closely now and be amazed. My lanky assistant is about to consume a whole toad, alive and kicking. Several gasps and retches of disgust followed this proclamation, but he had their attention nonetheless. Not just unknown bypassers, but the entire group I had been with was watching now too. Rin waved at me, winking as if telling me to do my best. So none of them were coming to save me, it would seem. Now then, lad, open wide. Jiraiya walked around behind me, grabbing my jaw and pulling at my forehead to force my mouth open. Here I come. Giratora didn't even give me a chance to do anything, flying into my mouth the moment it was open. I thought about using my jutsu to escape, but with this many people watching the risk was too high. Very few people in the world knew about the power of my Mangekyo Sharingan, and I would like to keep it that way. So I could do nothing but suffer through the next several agonizing seconds as Giratora forced his way inside, struggling, kicking, and squirming the whole way. The feeling was indescribable, having a living creature bigger than your head and covered in slime force its way down your throat. And it was something I never hoped I would have to do a second time in my life. Finally it did end, leaving me gagging and coughing, collapsing to all fours in the process. I could also feel the chakra from the key synchronizing with my own, a brief sign of the seal appearing monetarily on my arm before disappearing. Tada! Jiraiya yelled, and a round of applause broke out. Very confused applause, but applause nonetheless. People began to filter out, and the giant toads on either side of me vanished in a poof of smoke. Along with my master. Just like that, and he was gone, on his way to possibly fight a dangerous foe. Was this really how he wanted us to part ways? Nice trick, Obito-senpai. Naruto ran up to me, still clapping and laughing at my expense. I don't really get it, and it was pretty weird, but that was really funny. I didn't know you did comedy stuff. Neither did I until just now. You all right there? Asuma extended a hand to help me to my feet and I took it. You don't gotta throw it up or anything later, do ya? To the question, I merely shook my head, still not trusting my voice to work after having a toad slide down my gullet. Where did that guy you were with go? Sakura was looking around, but she would find no sign of Jiraiya now. He seemed kind of familiar, but apparently just contact with one of the Sannin was enough to give her a kind of sense for them. While it was true the general presence of Jiraiya and Orochimaru was vastly different, there was no denying they both gave off a similar aura in a sense. Well, let's not worry about that and continue to enjoy the festival, okay? Kurenai quickly changed the subject, likely one of the few people to see through Jiraiya's disguise. What, you okay letting us tag along on your date? Ino apparently hadn't let up on that, and it would appear it still didn't embarrass the pair any less. Even so, the entire group was beginning to set out. So it looked like what had once started as just the three of us had turned into a rather large group. Here, Obito. Rin wrapped an arm through mine, smiling up at me. I'll help you walk for a bit, okay? Fortunately for us, we were behind the rest of them now so no one could see the way in which she had just casually done that. Even if they weren't looking though, I couldn't help the way my own eye lingered on Rin a little longer than normal. Everyone's teasing and jokes kept circling in my head and I found my eye glancing to Rin's pink kimono in particular. It was something she always wore, yet it was oddly appropriate for the festival at the same time. What? She asked, noticing my long stare. I finally averted my eye, glancing back at those ahead of us as we made to follow them. Nothing, I mumbled. Thanks, is all. I couldn't deny this feeling welling up inside of me. The feeling that this was really nice. Was this what I could have had if I had remained in the leaf all this time? Rin walking by my side. Friends like Asuma and Kurenai to hang out with and drink beer. A younger generation to teach and have followed behind me like Naruto, Sakura, and Ino. Were these all things I had thrown away until now because I was running away? It all seemed so foreign to me now. Yet here I was, little by little reclaiming myself. Today was finally it. The day of the final exam of the Chunin promotion exams was finally upon us. After our fight and subsequent reconciliation, Naruto and I had jumped right back into training the next day. He had already successfully performed the Fire Flower Jutsu before that, so from there it was just getting the Jutsu up to actual combat use levels of proficiency. This meant being able to perform the Jutsu under a multitude of scenarios and under any kind of pressure. It wasn't just us, but Guy and Lee had returned to help continue with that training. Naruto and I both apologized to them for the awkward scene we made after the last time, but neither of them really seemed to mind. Apparently students and teachers fought sometimes. They said it had happened to them before too, so not to worry about it. Honestly, hearing that even they weren't somehow above such things really helped. It made me realize I was just going through the same steps as everyone else. Having a taijutsu master like Guy around helped immensely in getting Naruto's hand-to-hand combat up to snuff. I wasn't shabby at taijutsu by any means, but I had no idea how to teach it, much less to someone who didn't have the Sharingan to incorporate into their fighting style. It was good practice for Lee too, who had been looking for a way to practice combat against numerous foes simultaneously, so it wasn't like it was just us getting something out of this. All in all, Kakashi had asked me to buff up Naruto's basics, and I could say pretty confidently that I had accomplished that over this past month. Now the two of us, plus Rin and Sakura, walked through a nostalgic training ground to meet with Kakashi and Sasuke before heading to the arena all together. Hey! I recognize this place. Naruto suddenly exclaimed, looking at the surrounding forest. This is where we took the bell test with Kakashi-sensei. Hey. I couldn't exactly hide my surprise to hear Naruto knew this place. So Kakashi actually made you guys take the bell test too? In all honesty, I thought he might not have made them go through it. Teamwork wasn't exactly a big thing for Kakashi back when we first became Genin. He had always been a mission-first priority kind of guy back then. I suppose deep down, and even he had come to change. The bell test was supposedly the ultimate test of teamwork passed down from the third Hokage himself, who taught it to Master Jiraiya, who taught it to Minato-sensei, who would eventually share it with Kakashi, Rin, and I. Now it would appear Kakashi had passed it on to the next generation. Come to think of it, you did mention that you used to be on the same team as Kakashi-sensei. Sakura noted, just now seeming to remember that detail. She had been far more interested in the fact that I was an Uchiha like Sasuke when we were first introduced. What was he like when you were on a team? Good question. I wondered aloud, debating how best to describe him. In a word, like Sasuke. Rin answered before I could summarize my thoughts. Although part of me wondered if the answer was to pick on Sakura, as she certainly seemed to get a kick out of the bitter expression the younger girl made upon hearing such an answer. After that, the familiar 3 stumps of wood came into view. And leaning against them was Kakashi, along with Sasuke. Naruto and Sakura shouted together, running to the teammate they hadn't seen in almost a month. Although he seemed far less thrilled to see them, simply holding up a single arm in greeting. You're late again, Obito. Kakashi meanwhile called out to me, pushing off the stump he had been leaning on to meet us halfway. Although, I guess it's a good thing Rin is with you, otherwise it might have been much worse. Aren't you just early? I asked, glancing up at the sky to verify that the sun wasn't even all that high yet. We were definitely not what I would call late, which just meant he was messing with me. As it was, we would make it the arena with plenty of time to spare. I think he just likes having to wait for you at this point. Rin teased, the 3 of us all able to share a good laugh together for the first time in what was literal years. As the 3 of us got caught up, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura did the same. Looking at them, and I was reminded again in how many ways the 3 of them were just like the 3 of us. Perhaps the biggest difference was they had been lucky enough to be born during a time of relative peace and stability. I just really hoped for their sake that it remained this way for a while yet to come. If not forever. Sasuke seemed to notice me looking over at them and shared a nod in my direction. It was about the only greeting I got from him, but I couldn't say it was too surprising. He and I had never been close, and like with Naruto, he had been fairly young when I left the village with Master Jiraiya. At least he seemed to actually remember me. So how was it? Training Naruto, that is. Kakashi asked, breaking me from my thoughts. He had been following my gaze over to his 3 students, and while it was hard to tell behind that mask of his, I was pretty sure if he was giving me some kind of knowing smile. Humph, I folded my arms and smirked confidently back at my long-term rival and friend. Let's just say he might surprise you today during his match. That so? Kakashi asked, not appearing all that impressed by my claim. Well, if that's really true, then I'll have to thank you later. You'll have saved me quite a bit of trouble with that one. It was when Kakashi said that in which reality finally hit me. I wasn't going to be Naruto's instructor after this. This was only natural, of course. Kakashi was still his Jonin sensei, and I had simply been filling in temporarily to help for these exams. Yet somewhere along the way I had forgotten this simple truth. It really shouldn't have been anything to be disappointed about. Yet somehow I felt kind of empty. Like the whole reason I came back was being taken away from me. It had been the only thing I had really done this past month, after all. Once these exams were over and Jiraiya returned from hunting down the red-haired man, it was very possible I was going to have to leave the village again. This was another obvious statement, and when I had first returned to the leaf it had been something I was only all but looking forward to. Yet now, did I really want to leave again? After finally reconnecting with my old classmates? With Rin? Hey, Obito. As always, Rin seemed to know what I was thinking, grabbing my elbow in her arm and smiling up at me. You can keep coming around to have dinner with us. That offer to stay over whenever still stands too. Unlike before, when that offer had only caused me distress, it served to help still my heart this time. Hearing that my place here in the leaf wasn't necessarily just going to disappear was exactly what I needed. I would have to think about what to say to Jiraiya, but for now I needed to focus on other things at the moment, such as the tournament and my role assisting the Hokage throughout it. Thank you, Rin. I smiled at her, letting her know I was genuinely thinking about her offer this time and not just trying to deflect like before. Even without words she understood me, as expected of my childhood friend. Anyways, shall we go? Kakashi thankfully wasn't even paying attention to us, turning to go get his team to hurry them along. It was strange, seeing him act like a teacher in the same way Minato-sensei used to do for us. Yet it also somehow felt right that things had turned out this way. He had been our captain once too, so it made sense he was the one to guide them. Also, he was right about us needing to get a move on. The six of us then set out to the tournament arena together. Interlude. Uzumaki Nagato slowly opened his eyes. As he did, he briefly wondered if this was a dream. It certainly couldn't be reality. That was what anyone would think upon waking up to find that they were inside the stomach of some animal. Yet he had to accept this as reality. Jiraiya-sensei, huh? He wondered aloud. As he tried to move his arms and legs, he found them stuck to the walls, unable to get free. Oh, so it really is you, eh? Nagato. The disembodied voice of his one-time teacher came from all around him. I must admit, you've come to faster than I expected, but that's okay. I have questions for you. Is this how you plan to question your old student? Nagato's voice was full of mirth. By knocking them out and trapping them inside one of your toads? Try as he might, he couldn't remember how he got here in the first place. Just where had his old master even managed to attack him from, and at what timing? The last thing he remembered was waking up the day of the tournament and setting out to meet with Yahiko and Conan. Although, if he thought about it, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise that Jiraiya had discovered him. It was because of that one-eyed Uchiha man. Nagato didn't know his name, but he had felt his gaze. It must have been him that reported to Jiraiya. Even if he hadn't known Nagato's true identity, of course his former teacher would realize it. You're right. It's not very polite of me, now is it? Jiraiya laughed, as if telling some kind of joke. He hadn't changed at all from the time he used to mentor them. Sorry, but I can't be too cautious, you know? Not until I figure out your motives. What are you doing in the hidden leaf, Nagato? No, before that, what are you doing alive? Humph. Nagato smirked, not the least bit worried despite his precarious situation. Why am I here, sensei? I was invited. He ignored Jiraiya's second question completely. I came to watch my student, a genin of the rain, fight in the Chunin exams. The leaf and rain are allies now, are we not? So it's only natural that we would be here in a show of support for that treaty. I see now. So that's what's going on in the hidden rain. Despite Nagato having said nothing about the current state of their village, Jiraiya had somehow gleaned some information from him. So I take it Hanzo is dead, and you're in charge now? Close, but wrong. Nagato chuckled to himself. If you really think I would be in charge, you really have forgotten about us, sensei. No, there was someone far more capable of running the village than Nagato. And he would do everything he could to make sure that man stayed in power now that they had finally obtained peace. Which is why he couldn't stay here. Really? Then why don't we catch up for a while? You can remind me of some of the things it seems I've forgotten. Jiraiya finally showed himself, molding out from the very wall across from Nagato. You and I can take as long as we need. No, that won't be necessary. The parts of the wall holding Nagato's hands and feet suddenly burst open, spraying hunks of innards and blood flying in every direction. What? Jiraiya yelled, jumping backwards. Nagato looked up, revealing his Rinnegan eyes. The eyes he had kept hidden until now at all costs. I'm not the same weakling as I was when you last left us, Sensei. Through pain, I've learned to use the true power of my eyes. And now. He extended an open palm threateningly. It's time you learn a little about that pain. Interlude end. As we walked through the streets of the Leaf Village, I got the sense that we were truly now in the calm before the storm. The festive atmosphere of this past month had slipped away overnight, replaced now by quiet anticipation. It was a palpable enough feeling to even affect Naruto, who along with Sasuke had grown rather sullen as we made our way. Only Sakura was doing her best to ignore it, trying numerous times to strike up a conversation with Sasuke to no avail. This continued our whole way to the tournament grounds, until Sasuke finally perked up. Sakura looked relieved for a moment, as if she had finally gotten through to him. Only for a single word to bring those expectations crashing back down. Ni-san. Sasuke said, spotting his big brother among the crowds of people making their way into the arena. Itachi was waiting for him alongside Izumi, the two of them just to the right of the entrance. Upon seeing them, Sasuke went racing off, leaving the rest of us behind. Sakura looked to start chasing after him, but Kakashi put a hand on her shoulder, shaking his head when she looked up at him. It's about time we went our separate ways. You can come sit with Rin and I, if you want, he said, actually sounding oddly compassionate to her plight. I didn't know he had it in him. Sakura looked to consider his offer for several seconds before finally nodding and turning to Naruto. Do your best, Sakura said, surprisingly her teammate. I'm rooting for you too, so don't forget it. She reached forward, bumping his chest with her fist. I never expected you to be one for the jitters, I teased him, glancing down out of the corner of one eye for a reaction. Even that only garnered a more subdued response, however, Naruto simply giving a dull shrug instead of throwing some kind of contrary remark back in my face. All right, I sighed, crouching down in front of him and putting a hand on his shoulder. What's up? Being nervous before a battle is one thing, but for you to take it this far, something must really be getting under your skin. It's just, Naruto started to say, but paused. I almost think he was embarrassed, eyes darting back and forth to make good and sure no one else was listening in. What if I freeze up again? Like what happened with Gaara that night. Now I got it. Despite that incident having been a couple weeks ago now, it really did have a lingering effect on him. Which is something I couldn't really blame him for. Although I did have an idea how to help. You're strong, so you won't freeze up again, I told him plainly. Just like that and with confidence. As if I could look into the future and had already seen it with my own eye. How can you be so sure? Naruto yelled, still refusing to look at me and only staring at the ground. That guy is just like me, you know. You and that guy are nothing alike, I said immediately and with such force it shocked him. Naruto finally turned to look up at me, blue eyes shimmering with fear, but also hope. You're stronger than he is. I don't know what kind of tailed beast he is inside him, but you have the strongest of them all sealed inside you. And you keep it at bay every single day, while he can't even control his own. From just that alone, I know you are the stronger between you two. It really was a lot more complicated than that. Such is the type of seal used and the mental condition of the host playing important roles, but Naruto didn't need to hear any of that. What he needed was a boost. So I gave him the most encouraging smile I could. If even all that isn't enough, just remember that I can teleport. I was able to save you last time and I didn't even know where you were. This time, I'll be watching. So fight without holding back. If for whatever reason that ends up not being enough, I'll bail you out. You're the future Hokage, after all. And as your senior, I can't let anything happen to you. Naruto gaped, mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Even without words, however, I could see the light slowly return to his eyes and his sagging shoulders relaxed. Finally, he broke out in a smile to match my own. Not a forced one this time. Thanks, Obito-senpai. That was all he said, but it was enough. That's more like it. I nodded once more to him and stood up. Now let's go. The two of us then entered into the hallway leading him to the arena floor. As we reached the end, several other competitors came into view standing out in the view of the crowds. I also noticed another former classmate of mine, Shiranui Genma, standing among them. It would appear he was the proctor selected to replace Hay-8. The arena itself was a fairly large grassy area, only a small pocket of trees planted around its outer edges. Tall walls surrounded the whole thing, and to our right, above those walls, were the audience stands. As expected, but the seats were filling up quickly, and even from here the full roar of people's casual chatter could be heard. No doubt all kinds of predictions and wagers were being made right now as everyone began anticipating how the matches would go from here. Assuming everything went smoothly, of course. Above the stands was a building further. It was there I would be standing, on a balcony with 5 seats set out for the Hokage and the 4 leaders of the other villages who would be in attendance. As I wandered up to that area, I saw the Hokage himself enter onto said balcony. Looks like it's time for me to go. I mumbled under my breath. Naruto didn't seem to hear me, suddenly shouting for a friend he spotted hanging out around Genma. I quickly glanced that way to see Asuma's student had already arrived. Poor guy must have been dragged here extra early by his teacher. It was good for Naruto though, who was already running to see him. At the very least, it would appear his energy and confidence were back. That much was a relief for me, because it meant I could go do my own duties without having to worry about his mental state. Glancing back and forth, I confirmed no one was looking before activating my Mangekyo Sharingan. The world twisted away, being replaced by the sight of the Hokage walking up to me. Hokage-sama. I greeted him, bowing my head. While looking down, I took the chance to observe the stadium from a high vantage point. Naruto and the others were the size of miniature toys from up here, the whole arena looking more like a playset now. Obito, so you've arrived. The Hokage greeted me casually, not the least bit surprised by my sudden appearance in front of him. Of course, it hadn't been my intention to catch him by surprise, but very few people were used to me just popping up in front of them by tearing a hole in space-time. Yes, but before that, I said, looking behind the Hokage and his noticeably exposed back. Why didn't you bring any guards with you? At the very least you could have waited for me at the Hokage Tower. I would have escorted you here had I known you planned to come otherwise unattended. My concern was met with a deep laughter. There's no need for things like that. The Hokage waved it off and took his seat directly in the middle of the placed chairs. He looked to move for his pipe, but stopped himself. Either he didn't have it on him or was trying not to smoke in public, I wasn't sure, but he clearly seemed to miss it. Besides, I recall your constant tardiness when you were a genin. If I had waited for you, we would have both been late. So to make up for that, he started bringing up unnecessary memories at my expense. Why is that the only thing everyone seems to remember about me? I grumbled, but couldn't help the small smirk. He ignored my rhetorical question, and so I took my spot directly to the back left of his chair, the two of us now in position to receive his guests. This would be my first time meeting any of the leaders, let alone another member of the Gakage. Whether I felt I was mentally prepared for it or not, however, they were here. With the Hokage having taken his seat and the games nearly about to begin, the other high-ranking guests were slowly ushered onto the balcony to be able to take their own seats. This started with the highest-ranking official from the lands, which meant one of the Gakage was next and would take the seat to the right of the Hokage. The only one of the 5 great nations we were currently in an alliance with was the Land of Wind, and so that meant the Kazekage of the Hidden Sand would be the only other one of the 5 in attendance. The 4th Kazekage, Raza, approached us from the right. To his side was a man I recognized by the name of Baki. I knew him because he was the one officially signed on the records as being Gaara's Jonin sensei. Ah, Kazekage Dano. The Hokage rose from his seat, extending his hand to the chair next to him as a gesture to sit. Thank you for taking the time to come all the way to our village. I do hope you'll enjoy the matches today. As expected of one of his title, but the conduct of his speech was of the utmost cordiality. Likewise, Hokage-sama. The Kazekage returned the polite speech, taking his seat next to the Hokage, who then took his own. Baki and I merely nodded silently at one another, acknowledging each other's presence, but also silently sizing the other up. Normally such niceties would end there, but the Kazekage himself seemed to take an interest in me, turning his head back to scrutinize my face for himself. You are. He spoke, some form of realization seemingly dawning on him. I felt myself tense slightly under his hard gaze, waiting for whatever words might come next. Was it possible he had seen me that night? If my information was correct, Gaara was his own flesh and blood son. And while it may have been in self-defense, it was an undeniable truth that I had attacked him with my strongest Ketan Jutsu that night. My worries amounted to nothing thankfully as he continued. Certainly Uchiha Obito. The one who gave the hero of Canopy Bridge, Hatake Kakashi, his Sharingan eye. This was the unfortunate truth of my existence. I was more well known for the deeds performed by Kakashi, who used my left eye rather than any actual accomplishments of my own. It couldn't be helped, however. The fact that I could use Mokutan Jutsu and my awakened Mangekyo Sharingan were closely guarded village secrets. That didn't mean it wasn't sometimes a little frustrating, though. Even so, I couldn't allow this to show on my face and so simply smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. Having verified this information, the Kazekage let out a low laugh. It would appear I'm being underestimated. If you were going to have a guard, would it not be better to have the Copy Ninja himself? The Kazekage said, speaking directly to the third again. Of course, while you are still young, I can only imagine the strain an actual battle would put on you. For his part, the Hokage merely chuckled to himself. Neither he nor I could say anything directly to such insults of my ability. I don't plan to have to fight today or anymore for some time, but you would do well not to think so little of the original owner of the Copy Ninja's eye. Or so I thought, but the Hokage's words were far more direct and aggressive than I expected him to be. Nothing more than that could be said, as the next guest was walking towards us from the left. After the Kazekage, the other 3 village leaders all shared the same rank. So the order in which they would be brought out and sat was based on the length of time they had been in alliance with the Hidden Leaf. The Hidden Rain was our longest-standing alliance, a treaty having been formed after the Second Shinobi World War. For a long time it was Hanzo the Salamander who had been the leader of the Hidden Rain. He was the man strong enough to fight my master and his 2 teammates to a stalemate single-handedly and had been the one to give them their moniker. All present information gathered by Jiraiya and myself would have indicated that he was still the leader. Yet it was a younger man, perhaps the age Minato-sensei would be now, that approached us. Next to him was a woman of about the same age, a peculiar rose made of paper decorating her blue hair. It is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Yahiko, and this is Conan. The man greeted us, bowing respectfully to the Hokage who had yet to rise from his chair. I apologize for the recent secrecy surrounding our village, but as perhaps you understand, transitions of power are not always easy. That was one way to word a likely coup d'etat. Still, this guy couldn't be no slouch to have potentially done in Hanzo. Another one to be careful of. Out of respect for the alliance, we have decided to finally show ourselves and hope we can continue relations as they used to be between our two villages. He seemed earnest enough. At the very least his words were polite, and the fact they showed themselves at all implied some sense of normalcy had returned to the reign and they were looking to once more come back out into the world. Although the appearance of that red-haired man still troubled me and lingered at the back of my mind. I never had heard from Jiraiya after he said he was going to take care of that personally. I just hoped everything was all right. Any kind of conflict between them could potentially ruin the effort this man called Yahiko was putting forward now. The Hokage for his part smiled. I am always open to a dialogue between villages. Now please, have a seat and let's all enjoy these matches together. He gestured for Yahiko to take a seat. The man nodded in appreciation and took his place to the left of the Hokage. Konan took up her spot behind him, and again she and I began to size one another up. I was starting to not like this, being the one directly in the center of this gathering. Having only my right eye made this especially troublesome, as I was essentially entirely blind to the left without obviously turning my head. The surprises kept coming as to our right the leader of the hidden waterfall approached. Again, it was a different leader than what our information would suggest, but unlike with the case of Yahiko, it was a much older existence that had taken the role. One older than the third Hokage even, despite the fact that you wouldn't think so going by his appearance alone. It has been a long time, Hiruzen. Kakuzu greeted as if speaking with an old friend. Just behind him was the man who was supposed to be the leader, Shibuki, who had apparently stepped down for whatever reason and was now just the guard. Kakuzu. Even the Hokage appeared surprised, which was quite rare for someone as veteran as himself. No one could fault him in this case. Kakuzu was supposedly a missing ninja according to the bingo book and had been on the run from his village since before the third even took the position of Hokage. Yet here he was now, its supposed leader. No need to be so surprised. Kakuzu didn't wait to be offered a seat, merely taking his place next to the Kazekage. It turns out running a shinobi village is quite profitable. So I simply returned to the place I was meant to be. Waterfall has been suffering for manpower lately too, so they were all too glad to have me back. Isn't that right, Shibuki? He asked of his underling. Yes, Kakuzu-sama. Shibuki merely bowed his head in a docile manner. It was hard to tell for sure, but I got the distinct impression he was on the verge of tears. Still, it wasn't our place to say anything about the affairs of another village, and so the Hokage merely nodded in acceptance to his presence. He had come here peacefully so far. So despite being a former missing ninja, maybe he really had come to change his ways. Again, I felt that pressure I once had. Just like before the Uchiha incident. Something here wasn't quite right. There were too many unknown variables stacking up all at once, and it made me uncomfortable. All of those variables were nothing in the face of the last one, however. The latest and most recent village to join our alliance that was being represented in these matches today, the Hidden Sound Village. A possible front for Orochimaru's schemes, or at the very least a village that had joined hands with the snake in some way. Their leader was the last to approach, once again from the left. A woman with long black hair, chubby cheeks, and the most off-putting smile I had ever seen approached us. Her purple eyes were like poison, her whole existence causing my skin to crawl and immediately putting me on guard. Despite being the most physically non-intimidating presence here, she was the one I was most weary of. Next to her was an incredibly pale white-haired man, 2 red dots just above his eyes being his otherwise most defining characteristic. "Good day to you, my lords." The woman greeted us, voice dripping with honey. "My name is Mume, the leader of the Hidden Sound Village, and this is my guard, Kimimaro." She gestured to the pale man. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you all for allowing me to join in this alliance with you. I hope we can continue to help one another out from this point forward." She bowed deeply, black hair falling in front of her face to hide whatever nasty expression it was she was now making. No one, not even the Hokage, returned her greeting, merely continuing to stare at her and her guard as if sizing her up, the same as I was doing. If the silence bothered her, she did not mind and simply took her seat next to Yahiko, the whole time smiling that sickly, forced smile. To my right, Conan also noticeably tensed up, having these newcomers being the closest to her and her master. My gaze must have caught her attention, because she silently turned back to me and a quick nod of understanding was shared between us. Like it or not, I was left with slim pickings for actual allies up here, despite the fact we were all supposedly in an alliance. Among all these figures, and despite being new faces themselves, Yahiko and Conan gave me the best impression. It was just a gut feeling, but if Jiraiya were here, he would tell me to trust that instinct. "All right," the Hokage said, bringing my attention back to him as he rose from his seat and took a couple steps towards the railing at the edge of the balcony. "Now that we're all here, shall we get started then?" It was a rhetorical question, and he didn't wait for an answer from any of them, sucking in a deep breath and then booming out with a voice you wouldn't believe wasn't being amplified by some jutsu. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out to the Chunin exams hosted today in the Hidden Leaf Village." It was incredible, the once constant ruckus from below was suddenly silenced. Every single person in attendance now gave the Hokage their complete and undivided attention. For a single man to have such power in just his voice alone, even now, time and again, I was in awe of Sarutobi Hiruzen as a person. We shall now begin the main matches between the 8 contestants who passed the preliminary round. He continued. My Sharingan I turned down to see all 8 of the young genin standing proudly in representation of their village. Naruto stood beside Shikamaru and Sasuke, Shino not far from them. It was this half of the group that made up the Leaf's representatives. To the other side was a single shinobi each from the sand, rain, waterfall, and sound. Those 4 formed their kind of own group, not that there was much choice. Individually, they were outnumbered by the Leaf Genin, which was also why the matches had been purposely set up with one Leaf Genin against one of the members from a foreign nation. Please enjoy the fights. The Hokage finished, returning to his seat. On the floor of the arena, Genma began giving instructions to the 8 gathered genin. His back was turned to me, so it was impossible to read his lips from here, but it was no doubt standard information anyways, such as rules for the matches and where they would be directed while it wasn't their turn to fight and such. Finally, he seemed to finish and 6 of the genin began to shuffle their way off the field, leaving just behind Uzumaki, Naruto, and Ajisai, the 2 combatants of the official first match of the tournament. While our first strategy meeting had been interrupted by the arrival of Guy and Lee, the 2 of us had managed to finish going over his tactics for his fights at a later date. There was no fight we put in more work than this first one. Ajisai didn't seem to be a particularly powerful opponent compared to what he might have to face later, but she wasn't someone to just be underestimated either, especially considering she would also be taking this first round the most seriously. The very nature of the Chunin exams meant you had to put it all on the line in the opening bout. After all, winning and losing were ultimately irrelevant to whether or not you would receive a promotion or not. It was just about your performance, which meant this first fight might be your only chance to show your stuff to the higher-ups. Of course, there were also some things you shouldn't be showing off for everyone to see. For example, Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki wasn't something we exactly just wanted to flaunt. It was already possible he was being targeted as it was, so revealing such information was only going to increase the potential number of people after him for the tailed beast within. Naruto hadn't been thrilled when Rin and I told him he shouldn't rely on its chakra if he absolutely didn't have to. Apparently Rin had been teaching him a little about how to pull it out and use it ever since he was younger. It was an area I didn't have much expertise in, despite having a Sharingan, so I passed on furthering such training myself. That was something better left to another Jinchuriki, like Rin. Even without such power, I was confident in Naruto's ability to take this fight. He just had to do what he had been doing during our spars, use his head and think on the fly. So long as he was open to being able to adapt to the situation, he should be able to handle himself. Just like what a true Chunin would be expected of doing. Naruto and his opponent turned to face one another. Genma had already given them space, and it looked like the start of the fight was free for the two of them to decide. Now it was just a matter of waiting for who would break first and attack. "So that's Uzumaki Naruto, huh?" Yahiko asked, leaning forward to better watch the fight. "I've heard a lot about him this past month." My shoulders tensed, wondering exactly what it was he had heard. Even among the civilians of the village, Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki wasn't exactly a carefully guarded secret. To my knowledge, that secret had never left the village walls, as even they didn't speak about it. Seems he's not very popular and is considered a bit of a screw-up. I was actually reminded a bit of myself listening to them talk about him. I'm hoping he will be a good adversary for our Ajisai. It would seem that secret would continue to be safe for the moment too. I turned my eye from the yet-to-begin battle to once again study Yahiko. He claimed Naruto reminded him a bit of himself. That was a feeling I was also very familiar with at this point. Perhaps it was because I had somehow sensed that he and I were similar that I felt okay with trusting them a little. I couldn't say for sure, but it was a start at least. No matter what anyone says about him, the Hokage smiled, beaming down at Naruto with pride. Naruto is a splendid shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, and it is an honor to have him represent our village. Likewise, I am looking forward to how Ajisai will test him and push him to further himself. Yahiko nodded and said, "I'm glad then." For Ajisai's first opponent to have been someone who overcame so much pain to earn that respect. I look forward to this match. There was something about his wording that slightly put me off, but I wasn't sure what it was. Maybe not the words themselves, but the tone? As if there was some undercurrent of hatred running through him. Hatred for what? I wasn't sure. I could tell now this guy was only showing us the surface. There was far more going on underneath than I had originally assumed. As soon as he finished speaking, the battle below began. So for now I pushed all other thoughts aside and turned my Sharingan back to the field. I had also been looking forward to this fight. So I wasn't about to miss a second of my student as he put it all on the line. "Katan, Fire Flower Jutsu!" Naruto yelled, forming the seals and opening the battle with the jutsu I had taught him. His voice was impossible to hear from all the way down there, but my Sharingan easily allowed me to lip read without a problem. "Paper Shuriken Jutsu!" Ajisai returned Naruto's ranged attack with one of her own, throwing a barrage of origami paper folded into the shape of shuriken throwing stars. I immediately studied this new jutsu, Sharingan breaking down the chakra molded into the paper. Like with the Fire Flower Jutsu, it would appear she could manipulate the trajectory of the paper, and tucked inside the folded origami were explosive seals. It would have been a devastating jutsu, but Naruto seemed to realize how she was manipulating the shuriken and so guided his own fire-encased shuriken to meet those. Each combatant had thrown out 10 projectiles. All 10 of them collided in the middle, the fire setting off the explosive seals that immediately covered the whole arena and temporarily blocked them both from view. With the fight temporarily unwatchable, I glanced at Konan once again while I could afford the opportunity. As I thought, the paper rose in her hair was emitting the same type of chakra frequency as the paper that Ajisai had just used. It appeared to be some form of yang-type manipulation, but at that level it couldn't be easily taught. I imagine there were only a couple users of such a style in the whole world. As I reached this conclusion, Konan glanced over at me and smirked, not at all perturbed by the gaze of my Sharingan. That Katan Jutsu was a favorite of the Uchiha during the Second War. she said, no doubt making the connection between my Sharingan and the jutsu that Naruto had just used. It would appear this is also a battle against our students. She readily admitted to being the one who taught Ajisai that paper jutsu. So it would seem. I agreed with her, turning back to the field. There was no more need to study her jutsu, and I didn't want to risk missing anything further. All the same, I felt the competitive fire inside me burn just a little more brightly. Even more than before, I wanted Naruto to show the results of our training. Several more explosions rang out, kicking up further smoke and dust. Yet within it all I could make out several things. It would seem Naruto had already pulled out his clones and was sending them out en masse to surround the enemy. There was something else moving within the smoke that I couldn't make out, but they appeared quite large whatever they were. And they were halting the advance of Naruto and his clones. Finally, the smoke cleared enough to reveal over 100 Naruto clones and 3 giant animals made of origami. All 3 of them were easily the size of a small house. One was a bird, currently circling overhead. The second of them was a dog which was currently on the offensive, ripping through Naruto's clones like he was the one made of paper. The last one appeared to be a salamander, and for now it had just taken a defensive position, wrapping its body and tail around Ajisai to protect her from any potential attacks. Katan, Fire Flower Jutsu. Several of the clones unleashed a blaze of fireballs at the salamander. It was in this moment that the paper bird circling above flapped its wings, generating powerful gusts of wind that immediately put out the flames, exposing the shuriken hidden within. The tail of the paper salamander then slapped those shuriken away, making the attack all but worthless. As this went on, the paper dog continued to maul its way through the wall of Naruto's, just now taking out the ones that had unleashed the Katan Jutsu. It was a fearful combination. Combining an aerial and ground-based offensive with a solid defense all at the same time. As it was, I didn't see how Naruto was going to get out of this without more firepower than what he was currently generating. He needed a bigger jutsu. Or at the very least a distraction big enough to get within guard of that salamander. You ready to give up yet? Ajisai seemed to realize Naruto was about to be beaten too. In your dreams. Several of the Narutos shouted at the same time. They were immediately ripped apart by the paper dog. The whole display caused Ajisai to let out a big sigh before glaring at whichever Naruto was closest to her. You leaf shinobi are all the same. She spit out darkly. So carefree and happy-go-lucky. It honestly makes me sick. Seeing you live the way you do after piggybacking off of the wealth of poorer nations like mine. The hell are you talking about? Naruto asked, busy running around and preparing the seals for another Katan Jutsu, aiming to take down the paper dog this time. The moment he unleashed it and the paper bird immediately put the flames out again. The shuriken hit their mark and just stuck to it worthlessly, the origami creature incapable of feeling any pain. You seriously mean you don't know about how your village and others ravaged across our lands in the last couple wars? His ignorance on the matter only seemed to anger her further, Ajisai leaning on the paper tail of the salamander to yell at him. Your careless actions made generations of my people suffer. Beats me. Naruto yelled, that clone barely dodging a swipe from the paper dog by rolling underneath it. He was then immediately crushed by a whip of its tail. If you really care so much about something like that though, I'll work on making it up to you one day. Another nearby clone continued where the last had left off, jumping up on the back of the rampaging origami creature and stabbing at it with a kunai. How do you plan to do that? Ajisai scoffed at the clone that was obliterated when the dog rolled over, crushing it along with a dozen other Narutos in the process. You can't even do anything against my origami beast jutsu. It'll be easy. Aside from a couple stranglers here and there was only one conglomerate of about 20 Narutos all stacked up together in one group left. I'm the man who is gonna become Hokage, you know. They all declared confidently and loud enough to even be heard by those of us in the upper balcony. "I've had enough of your nonsense." In contrast, Ajisai seemed to be done with the conversation, whispering quietly to herself. "The real you is obviously in that crowd. This battle ends now." The paper dog leapt in the air, coming crashing down on the 20 or so Narutos and flattening them out of existence. What? If the original had been there, the remaining Naruto clones should have also burst into smoke after taking such a devastating blow. Yet the 4 or so clones that had fanned out over the arena were still there. Meaning it had to be assumed one of those 4 was the real Naruto. It doesn't matter. Your situation hasn't changed. Ajisai thought as much at least. What she failed to see, however, that was clearly apparent from my angle, was the man-sized hole in the ground below where the paper dog had just belly-flopped. The real Naruto was burrowing. I realized now why he had kept his clones so conspicuously gathered like that, as it had been to hide what the real one was doing. It had to be the original because there was no way a clone could withstand the effort needed to forcibly claw your way through the earth as Naruto had to be doing. All for the single purpose of getting between Ajisai and her paper salamander. Ajisai never realized her mistake, still tracking the remaining visible Naruto as her faithful origami dog hunted them down. It destroyed 2 of them, leaving just 2 left. As it zeroed in on the 3rd one and wiped it out, leaving only the last one, was when the real Naruto reached his destination. Ajisai must have heard him just seconds before he broke through, looking down too late. Naruto broke through the dirt, a confident smile splitting his mud-covered face and hands already in the tiger sign. Hidden Leaf's secret taijutsu. He called out the name of his technique. One I hadn't heard of before. Had Guy secretly taught him some kind of forbidden taijutsu? Whatever I thought I was about to witness didn't prepare me for the disappointing truth. 1,000 years of death. The disappointment of watching my young student shoving his fingers up the butt of his female opponent. Kya! Ajisai screamed at the top of her lungs, jumping literally 15 meters into the air, either of her own volition to get away from the jutsu or just out of reflex. I had no idea which. Piohaha! Yahiko broke out in a fit of laughter, unable to contain himself. Conan didn't seem to share in his humor, staring at me with such an intense gaze I thought I might be liquefied on the spot. Obito, is this what you've been teaching Naruto? Even the Hokage had to ask, pulling his ceremonial hat down so he didn't have to watch any further. Like hell I taught him that. I momentarily forgot my station and yelled out in indignation. That kind of technique is definitely Kakashi's work. I have nothing to do with this. Although I couldn't deny, going underneath the opponent in that way to get them like that had been exactly what he tried with me the day I decided he was ready to start learning strategy. Had I unknowingly influenced him to think like this? It would appear his attack isn't over. The Kazekage, unlike the rest of us, hadn't turned his attention away from the battlefield. He knew he couldn't land the finishing blow coming up from below like that. So he's put her in a position where she can't guard anymore. The real conclusion is about to come. Katan, Fire Flower Jutsu. Naruto's clone yelled. It was just as the Kazekage said, the last Naruto clone unleashing his jutsu and attacking the now exposed Ajisai, who was suspended in the air. None of her origami creatures were close enough to save her. But they didn't need to be, the bird flapping its wings to extinguish the flames surrounding the shuriken. Only this time they didn't go out. Ajisai for the second time didn't get to finish that exclamation. The flaming shuriken all burst into smoke, revealing 10 more Naruto clones that were flying right for her. It was at that moment I understood. Naruto hadn't actually used the Fire Flower Jutsu. He merely made it look like he had, because he knew Ajisai was going to be focused on putting out those flames. This had cost her the valuable couple seconds needed to prepare a counterattack, and the shuriken had simply been Naruto clones that had used the transformation jutsu in order to get in close. Uzumaki. Naruto began calling out his name, with each syllable one of the clones striking Ajisai with a powerful blow. She managed to block the first couple, but was quickly overwhelmed by the pure numbers that had gotten in close. Naruto Barrage. All the clones called together, delivering powerful kicks that sent Ajisai flying to the ground below. It was a technique inspired by watching Lee unleash something similar on his own clones. While he couldn't produce the same power individually as Lee could, his clones together more than made up for that. Although he wasn't getting any points for his naming sense. Ajisai hit the ground head first and was temporarily covered in the cloud of dust kicked up from the impact. All the Naruto clones weren't far behind, landing nimbly on their feet only seconds later. The real Naruto had been trapped in the tail of the salamander immediately after unleashing his surprise attack, but it along with the other two had frozen in place, waiting on standby for some kind of command from their caster. When none came, they reverted back to miniature size and bursts of smoke, the bird falling out of the sky. The original Naruto was freed and landed on his feet. He dismissed the rest of his clones and slowly began to approach where Ajisai had landed. It looked like he wanted to call out to her, but as he approached, it became apparent that she was already out cold. Likely from the moment her head hit the ground. Genma also approached, bending down to inspect Ajisai's condition. He then nodded to someone unseen, and a moment later several medical ninja with a stretcher began running out onto the field. As they came out, Genma held up his hand, extending it towards my student. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto had won. He'd actually pulled off a rather splendid victory against his opponent during the opening match of the tournament. Well, mostly splendid, so long as you ignored that finger up the butt part of his final strategy. Now the crowds below us cheered for him, going absolutely wild for the display they had just seen. It truly had been an auspicious fight, packing in explosions, unique jutsu, and a clever trick to finish it all off. I don't think anyone had seen such a fight coming from the once detested outcast of the village. Yet such things didn't seem to matter to anyone now, every single person in the stands cheering for Naruto. Solely for Naruto. He appeared stunned, merely looking up at the source of the noise as if trying to determine what it was. His mouth hung open and shoulders were slack in disbelief. Genma said something to him, briefly catching his attention before he once again looked back at the crowd with renewed focus. He seemed to be scanning for something, eyes finally darting up to the balcony I was standing on. It was hard to tell if he would see it or not, and I couldn't risk being too overt, but I extended a quick elbow-high thumbs up. The gesture must have reached him, because he broke out into a huge grin, returning my gesture with a peace sign. I won. He yelled, beginning to jump around and blow kisses into the crowd and bask in their praise. This must have been a completely foreign feeling for him, getting this kind of positive attention from the masses instead of the glares and spite he was used to. Yet that didn't stop him from absolutely reveling in it. This was a major step towards achieving his dream, receiving this kind of acknowledgement not just from his peers, but the citizens he was employed to protect. And I couldn't be more proud of him. He had really used his head and wit in the battle, adapting on the fly to a tough situation and quickly finding a solution. He must have begun digging almost immediately after those 3 origami animals had come out in order to be able to make it to her in the time that he had. This meant he had analyzed things and broken them down in seconds, playing out the possible scenarios if he didn't get within her guard. Despite how dumb he normally acted, that was the kind of out-of-the-box thinking of a true strategist. Such an unconventional tactic might have been impossible for someone less stubborn, but Naruto was just bullheaded enough for that kind of strategy to work. All in all, it was a good showing for him and his possible chances of being promoted to Chunin. What was important now was how he continued to respond to future opponents. Since he was going to be moving on to the second round, On the other side of that coin was Ajisai. While she had definitely shown off a powerful jutsu that she controlled well, there was no denying she had been outplayed this time. Even if the move that determined the outcome had been several fingers rammed up her rear. If anything, that probably only made it worse. Not just for her, but for those she was representing. Yahiko had broken out in laughter when it first happened, but I don't think anyone expected such a prank-like technique to end up leading to victory. So when I looked over at the pair of Rain Ninja, I must admit it was with no small amount of trepidation. In the end, that was unnecessary. Oh man, what a fight! Yahiko leaned back in his chair, a glum smile on his face. It's too bad, but looks like we're already out of this tournament. Still, that Naruto kid really was something. Digging through the ground like that must have been excruciatingly painful, yet he did it anyways. That's a kid right there that understands the price of victory. Wouldn't you say, Conan? He turned his head, looking back up at the woman assigned to guard him. In contrast to him, she looked far more dissatisfied by the outcome of the match. Yet upon hearing her leader's remarks, Conan's facial expression softened somewhat to the point that even she was capable of a small smile. Yes, I suppose you're right. She glanced once more in my general direction. You've instructed him well. She praised me directly. Come on, Conan, don't be so modest about it. Yahiko shook his head at her, smiling in my direction now. Or more accurately, at the scars on my face. Very few people could look at them so directly, even shinobi. Yet Yahiko seemed to find them almost fascinating. It would seem you have also seen quite a bit in your time. I bet there were a lot of painful moments for you too. His words brought up unpleasant flashes that I quickly squashed. It's made you strong, he said, as if realizing what had just happened inside my head. Naruto is the strong one. I corrected him. Unlike me, Naruto hadn't given up on his dreams, and I had come to believe he wouldn't, no matter what. He's the one who thought of those drastic measures to win down there. I had nothing to do with that. In particular, that 1,000 years of death as he so called it. Ajisai was a good opponent for him. He never would have been backed into a corner like that if she hadn't been as strong as she was. These were my honest feelings. Ajisai truly did have a powerful jutsu. The only thing was, I do admit, her view of Konoha and the larger nations does have me a little worried. That had been some real outrage she had been spitting at Naruto down there. Not at him specifically, but at the whole system in general. For someone so young to have such extreme views of the greater political climate was, well, worrying to say the least. It implied that they still very much viewed themselves as at war with something. I knew this, because I had been somewhat the same in my youth. Although I had desired more of an end to the war than anything. Yes. Yahiko slowly nodded, turning his attention back down to the stadium floor. Ajisai had now been loaded onto the stretcher and the medical ninja were beginning to carry her off. I'm not sure what you heard her say. Unlike me, he hadn't been able to lip read from all the way up here. But I can kind of guess. All of us in the rain had a tough life after the wars. It's like we've been picking up the pieces ever since. This has left quite a few of us, myself included, with rather deep scars. When he turned back to me, his smile was no longer there, replaced by just melancholy. It is because of that pain that we are here now, in Konoha. To see if we can finally understand one another. He said. I wasn't sure I understood, but it kind of sounded to me like he meant they were testing us or something. More likely trying to determine if the alliance was worth preserving. I think watching Naruto and speaking with you has alleviated some of my doubts. While what he was saying was supposedly a good thing at face value, I still couldn't help but be uncomfortable by the logic used to get there. So long as we learned the same lessons from that pain. I replied, getting the feeling it was a response like that he was looking for. My hunch appeared to pay off as he gave a satisfied nod and once more looked forward. although I couldn't say I believed in my own words. It felt too much like what that man had been trying to fill my head with. That was only going to make things worse, not better. Problems such as that were better left to the Hokage, however, not to me. Speaking of the Hokage, though, the old man raised a hand, beckoning me forward. As I leaned into him, he whispered into my ear, "Very well handled, Obito. Maintaining a strong tie with the hidden rain is important, and you've appealed to their young leader wonderfully. Diplomacy and knowing when to use it is an excellent trait of any Hokage." I could say nothing to his words as I returned silently to a standing position. During that whole exchange he had been quiet, not speaking to the other leader as would normally be expected of him. Instead, he left that conversation to me and hadn't butted in, even though it would have been his right to. In fact, it could have possibly been contrived as more rude for him not to speak to them. Fortunately, in this case, Yahiko didn't seem to mind. If anything, he appeared more interested in hearing what a young blood like himself had to say rather than the old people who he would view as responsible for the past wars. So for now it was all good, but it still made me feel uncomfortable that the third was essentially leaving his job to me. It was time to put such concerns behind me as the next competitors made their way out onto the arena. Now that Ajisai had been lifted out and Naruto had taken his place in the waiting area, Nara, Shikamaru, and Fu took their place. As with the match before, but Genma just seemed to take a step back and was prepared to let the two of them figure out when they wanted to go at each other. I had never met Shikamaru, but after everything I heard about him both from Naruto and his own sensei, there was no way he was going to be the one to make the first move. Hell, he might be inclined to just take a nap before actually starting the battle. This meant the honor of deciding when the match would officially begin went to Fu herself. Fu was still an enigma to me. I had already told Naruto during our strategy sessions, but she was the one he was going to have to most adapt for. That's because the fact of the matter is I had no idea what her real abilities might be. She was pushed through to the finals by two teammates who immediately dropped out when given the opportunity, which suggested she was here for a reason, but up until now her powers didn't seem like anything noteworthy. Certainly unique, but not so much so that she absolutely needed to be in these finals. That was what I thought until now. With my Sharingan eye, however, I finally got a good look at her chakra for myself, and it was immediately apparent why she would be considered so special. Most people only had one type of chakra flowing through them, and that color was unique to everyone. Naruto, for example, had what I would call a yellow like the sun kind of chakra signature. This Fu girl had a kind of natural mint green. However, the two of them also had one other chakra, one that was deep red and sinister in color. This chakra pattern was something I had seen only 3 times before, in Naruto, Rin, and in that Gaara kid a couple weeks ago. In other words, she was a Jinchuriki. 4 Jinchuriki of 9 total were gathered here in this arena right now. There could be no possible way that was a coincidence. I didn't know where to look first, eventually glancing over at the waiting area for the combatants to make sure Sasuke was still there and safe. If Orochimaru was really targeting the tailed beasts, it made sense that he would go after him first. To my relief, I found Itachi and Izumi were both inside the waiting box with them. It would appear they had been stationed there as some kind of guards in case someone did exactly as I now feared. For now, Sasuke and by extension Naruto were in no immediate danger. So next I turned to Mume and Kimimaro. As possible accomplices of Orochimaru, they were the next most suspicious. Upon arriving, however, they had both done nothing more than silently observe the happenings beneath them. Ignoring Kimimaro, whose facial expressions hadn't once changed since he arrived, Mume continued that same eerie smile that seemed permanently plastered onto her face. For now, there was nothing to gain from observing them. Which just left Kakuzu and Shibuki. The older entity was no doubt the mastermind behind bringing Fu out to this tournament. Even knowing that didn't help me. His face, like the Kazekage's, was completely covered, leaving only a tiny gap in the space around his eyes and brow for which to see through. Just because he didn't have any kind of tails didn't mean Shibuki was the same. The moment Fu had come out on the field, he began trembling. He was terrified of something. Of Fu? There was at least precedent for that, as Jinchuriki were infamously disdained no matter which village they called home. I couldn't ask him directly, not with all the other villages here. Especially when I wasn't sure who to trust at the moment. However, I could definitely say now that the waterfall wasn't to be trusted. Kakuzu's return and subsequent leadership alone was a red flag, but the former leader having been reduced to this terrified state was the ultimate tell. There was something very wrong with the current state of the waterfall. That was as far as I got before a movement below caught my eye. I turned my attention back to the arena just as Fu unleashed the opening attack of the match. Scale Flashbang Jutsu. Fu exhaled a barrage of light-emitting powder, and when she clapped her hands together she released the jutsu, those thousands of particles all going off at once like a flashbang. I was forced to look away from the arena temporarily. Webbing Jutsu. Fu's attack didn't end there, next spitting out what looked like nets made of spider web. They covered a wide area, spreading out over most of the ground between herself and Shikamaru. It should have been impossible for him to dodge such a wide-ranging technique, especially considering he had just been blinded by that earlier sensory attack. Yet he rolled out of the way anyway, somehow able to perceive Fu's webs regardless of the handicap. Or perhaps, had he already closed his eyes in preparation for that jutsu? It had to be the case, as there was no way he could still be able to see otherwise right now. Shadow Paralysis Jutsu. Shikamaru unleashed his own jutsu the second he stopped rolling. The signature technique of the Nara clan. The shadows at his feet bent and contorted, elongated as it extended towards Fu. If he caught her in that technique, he would have complete control of her movements. In other words, it would essentially be his win. Fu wasn't about to just sit by and let that happen. She unleashed another flurry of the light particles that flashed brightly. The light pushed back the shadows, eliminating them completely and rendering Shikamaru's jutsu obsolete. She then unleashed more of those webs. This was simply a battle of who could capture whom first, it would seem. Both combatants specialized in immobilizing their opponent. However, Fu's light attack was the perfect foil to Shikamaru's shadows, meaning he was at quite the disadvantage right off the bat here. He seemed to realize this too, abandoning the jutsu to once again dive out of the way. He must have been slow to close his eyes this time, as he didn't appear to quite know where he was leaping. As he landed, one of his legs slipped, nearly sending him tumbling down into the hole Naruto had dug for himself earlier. Shikamaru let out a yelp of surprise, partially sliding into it and only just catching himself at the last second. It was his good luck, the near fall causing him to duck just under the web that would have captured him that moment. Otherwise, he had really put himself in a bad position now. Something he also seemed to realize, immediately setting up his jutsu the moment he was out of the hole. Shadow Paralysis Jutsu. His shadow once again began to stretch and move. Scale Flashbang Jutsu. And those same shadows were once again obliterated by the light-emitting particles. From here, the match was as good as decided. It didn't seem like Shikamaru had any other tricks up his sleeve, and all he could do was simply jump around in an attempt not to get caught. Fu had him completely cornered, having already covered most of the area behind him in webs too. All she had to do was throw one more volley and Shikamaru was all but guaranteed to be caught. Yet for some reason her next attack never came. She was just standing there rooted in place, impossible. But when did he dash? The closer I looked at it, the more it seemed to be the only possible explanation. He had caught her in his jutsu. Her face was clearly twisted in a strange snarl, body shaking as it attempted to move but couldn't. Heh, shadow paralysis, success. Shikamaru grinned, having still been in the stance for his jutsu up until now. As he stood up, I finally saw it. It was the hole Naruto had made earlier. One end of it was behind Shikamaru from when he nearly fell into it, the other was behind Fu. Now I got it. When she had used that flashbang-like jutsu, it was true the shadows in front of her and in between the two of them had disappeared. But the shadows behind them would have only grown larger. He waited for that timing, when her shadow became so large that he couldn't possibly miss. Then, by using the holes as a sort of bridge, he managed to trap her in the jutsu. All while it seemed like her jutsu was the perfect counter to his, it was actually that same technique that made this strategy viable. Not bad. I mumbled aloud, not able to contain my awe. Naruto's own tactic had been brilliant in that it required guts only someone like himself could pull off. This was a level even above that, turning his greatest disadvantage into the winning ticket. Damn, you really got me. Even Fu herself was impressed, chuckling all the while still trying to break free of his jutsu. Even in this situation she wasn't about to give up. And she might not have to. It was like I told Naruto, but this jutsu put an incredible strain on the chakra of the user. If you had enough chakra, it was possible to just run out the clock. I figured something like that would work with Naruto due to his massive reserves of chakra, but that was also a distinct advantage Fu shared with him as a fellow Jinchuriki. The question now was, did Shikamaru have a way to take her down while she was trapped in his jutsu? He was going to have to do it fast too, because it already looked like his control on the jutsu was beginning to waver. TCH, no good huh? Shikamaru sighed, raising his arm over his head, forcing Fu to do the same. All right, I give up. Or he could just do that. While I couldn't say this outcome came as much of a shock to me, it sure seemed to have been for most of the others watching. This was going by the sudden silence that was immediately followed by shouts of malcontent. Many in the crowds beneath us went as far as to start chucking their food and beverages into the arena below. Shikamaru appeared oblivious to all of this, simply sighing as he released his jutsu and starting to stretch. Fu, for her part, just appeared to be in a state of shock, having not yet decided whether to be happy she won her match or mad it had ended in such a way. Just because she didn't didn't also mean her village leader hadn't decided. What a worthless victory. Kakuzu spat, slamming his fist on the arm of his chair. Victory is victory, and there is value in that. The Kazekage responded coolly in comparison to the outrage being demonstrated by the one next to him. She will get a chance to redeem herself in the next round. That was right, now that she had won, the next stage was going to be her against Naruto. Jinchuriki versus Jinchuriki. Not that either one of them was likely aware of this at the moment. Before that, there were still 2 more matches of the first round to be decided. Shikamaru and Fu were walking off the arena together, the former apparently getting an earful from the girl he just made a fool of. I almost felt bad for him, but he had kind of brought it on himself. From what I could tell, Fu didn't seem to be a bad person. It made me feel kind of sad that someone like her might be getting used by the likes of Kakuzu. At least for the moment she could be like a more normal girl and interact with her peers. So Obito, what do you think? The Hokage asked me. Is Shikamaru ready for the promotion to Chunin? Again, it would seem he was asking me to weigh in on something that was ultimately his job. Although I guess giving my own 2 ryo wouldn't hurt in this case. Those few short minutes were all we had to base his promotion on, after all. Well, it's certainly troubling how fast he gave up after catching her, but... I once again leaned forward to speak into the Hokage's ear as the 2 of us conversed. None of the other leaders appeared to notice, everyone else engaged in their own conversation, but it was better to be cautious. I do ultimately think he made the right choice. He knew it was an unwinnable match. I was reminded of a fight Kakashi and I once had about the importance of cherishing your comrades versus completing the mission no matter the cost. His way of thinking seems to be in line with my own. I think he would place the lives of himself and his teammates first. A person like him is someone I would feel comfortable with having as captain of a squad. I see. The Hokage merely nodded along to my words, not offering any of his own input. Which at the very least probably meant he agreed with what it was I was saying. If he didn't, he would surely say something. Down below, as Shikamaru and Food left the arena, Aburame Shino and Dosu replaced them in it. All things considered, and it was a tough act they were going to be following up. While the fight before this hadn't necessarily been the most flashy, it certainly had gotten the people fired up in an unusual way. It also kind of put them in a bad mood, and you could feel the negative energy permeating all the way up here. I could only imagine what it must feel like to those two, having so many people already wound up looking down at you. Of course, as a member of the reclusive Aburame clan, Shino likely wasn't one to mind unless his personality was outside the usual clan parameters. Just looking at him led me to believe that wasn't the case. Dosu, meanwhile, looked equally unaffected by all of it, although it was hard to tell what was going on behind his mummified face. There was a lot to be weary of with this Dosu character. For starters, if the Sound was to make some kind of move today, it would make sense that they would be waiting for some kind of signal from him. So I had to be especially weary during this battle. This was for Shino's sake too. If it looked like anything funny might happen, he would be the first casualty. I had to be prepared to jump down to him at any time, even if it meant exposing the power of my Mangekyo Sharingan. Like with the last couple fights, Genma had taken to allowing the two to figure out for themselves when they would come at one another. However, unlike the previous two fights, this one began almost immediately. Dosu bent his body low, breaking into a sprint as he charged right at Shino. Despite this, Shino didn't attempt to move or guard in any way. Instead, he just stood there as Dosu swung at him. I'd read a little about the metallic contraption attached to Dosu's arm. It was some kind of sound manipulation device that when swung would distort sound waves in such a way as to cause a sense of unbalance and nausea. No doubt Shino had seen this attack in action already, so he knew how imperative it was that Dosu not get close to him. Yet he let him close the distance anyways. Most opponents would dodge the wild haymaker Dosu threw. It was when they dodged that his true attack would hit, the distorted sound waves attacking your sense of hearing directly. So in a way, the perfect counter to such an attack was simple when you thought about it: just don't dodge the punch. Which is exactly what Shino did, allowing Dosu's fist to clock him in the side of the head. Or should I say, that is what Shino's clone did. Shino had replaced himself at some point, possibly even before the match had started, with a bug clone of himself. The moment Dosu's fist socked him in the face, and the whole clone broke apart, turning back into thousands of tiny insects. Not just any insect, however, Kikeichu. The special chakra-sucking bugs, unique to the Aburame clan. As this happened, the real Shino stepped out from behind a tree nearby the entrance they both would have used to get into the arena. Dosu was too busy currently swatting away the insects that had latched onto him to notice. Many of them crawled their way inside his sound manipulation device, jogging the mechanisms that made it work. The rest simply began to drain his chakra. "You cheated!" Dosu yelled out, giving up on swatting off the bugs and instead making a break for the real Shino. "Untrue," the original Shino said, adjusting his sunglasses. "Why is that?" "Because the proctor himself already said it, there are no rules. You simply failed to realize I made a clone before the match had started. That is all that happened." What Shino said wasn't necessarily untrue, but it definitely was a dirty way to fight. If I had been his opponent, I would have been furious too. Just because it wasn't exactly ethical didn't mean Shino wasn't right. He was simply taking advantage of the rules, or in this case lack thereof. This was simply one truth of being a ninja. Dosu let out another vitriol scream, swinging wildly again at Shino just as he got in range. This time the original Shino did move, simply pulling a hand from his pocket and almost lazily catching the wild haymaker. Then with a simple jab he returned fire, blasting Dosu directly in the nose and sending him sprawling on his back. From there, Dosu attempted to rise back to his feet, but it was no good. The Kakechu had already sucked dry too much of his chakra, essentially draining him of any energy needed to move. He gave another gasp, trying to say something, but failing even that he collapsed once more and went still. Just like that, the match was over as quickly as it had begun. Winner, Aburame Shino, Genma announced. The applause that followed was much more subdued than before, the audience not even able to get the energy to be excited after such a quick and uneventful match. At least Shikamaru's had been interesting by comparison, and it had certainly gotten them fired up in a way. This was just sad. Especially for the Hidden Sound, as this was their first real showing of what they were capable of to an open world. It would be hard for them to get any kind of clientele like this. Not to mention it made me feel like an idiot for having been so worked up over what kind of signals or danger Dosu might pose while on the field. He had been out there for less than 2 whole minutes and had been promptly outplayed in the first move without ever getting to do anything. Although their leader didn't seem to mind. Oh my! How embarrassing! Despite her words, Mume just giggled uncontrollably, as if she really couldn't help but find it funny. Then again, that is to be expected of the mighty Hidden Leaf Village. You truly do have the strongest shinobi, like they say. She turned her head, leaning down to smile at the Hokage. My village didn't even stand a chance. Even when you don't win, your ninja perform in such a way that it feels like we lost. The hell was that, bitch? Kakuzu clearly realized the insult was thrown directly at him and Fu's performance in the last match. He looked to rise from his chair. In that instant, tensions from all the present ninja mounted and I could feel the swelling of chakra. Kakuzu was at one end and Mume at the exact opposite other. So if a fight between them broke out, it was likely to engulf us all. Again, I really hated the fact we were placed smack dab in the middle of this gathering. Despite this, the Hokage himself didn't even seem to feel any pressure at all, and I didn't sense any tension rising from him. Instead, he smiled casually and turned towards the aggressor. Now, Kakuzu-dano. There's no need for us to resort to violence. I'm sure Mume-dano meant no insult. She is simply young and new to this stage of politics. What do you say? Shall we forgive her for a simple slip of the tongue? For a second, it looked like Kakuzu was going to ignore the Hokage's words. Even he must have realized how bad an idea it would be to get involved in a fight here of all places. So after several moments of consideration, his chakra simmered down and he slumped back into his chair. As you say, Hiruzen. Kakuzu didn't bother with any of the honorifics. Of course, to someone of his age, even the third must appear young. There's no profit in getting involved with such a young village as theirs that lacks history. Even if he wasn't going to attack anymore, that didn't stop him from firing off one more shot. My apologies to Kakuzu-sama. Mume giggled as she spoke, making it hard for anyone to take her words as sincere. Truly, you are the epitome of compassion, Hokage-sama. It is no wonder a village as great as yours would accept such newcomers as my village. Again, for all the sweetness of her tone, I couldn't help but smell the poison leaking underneath the surface. There was some double meaning to everything she said, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out what it was she really wanted to be saying. No. The Hokage simply chuckled along with her, despite the fact he no doubt felt her venom too. We welcome all those who truly seek to build a greater future together. As expected of him, he had been able to calm Kakuzu before things escalated and now laughed amicably with the one who started it. All in only a couple words. It was good timing too. As Dosu had just finished being lifted out of the stage on a stretcher, leaving the arena open for the next 2 combatants. Shino had already made his way back up to the waiting area. Sasuke had jumped down from the top, preferring to take the faster route instead of traveling down along with his opponent. Not that I could blame him, I wouldn't want to be in the same arena alone with that maniac. It was highly likely Kakashi had warned Sasuke of as much too. He had to know how dangerous Gaara was, even without knowing he was an unstable Jinchuriki. Despite the audience's growing disappointment after the last two matches, you could tell that the anticipation for this one was greater than anything that had come before. It wasn't too surprising. Sasuke was one of the last surviving Uchiha, and Gaara was already becoming a miniature celebrity for his brutal fighting style and the official records showing great promise. It wouldn't be underselling it to say this fight was the day's main attraction. Even so, I couldn't share in this excitement. Not when one from my clan was about to go face to face against such an unstable child. One with a literal monster living inside his stomach. The images from that night flashed before my mind's eye again just as Gaara himself appeared, walking slowly out onto the arena. Despite the fact that he was only a genin, I had unleashed my strongest Ketan Jutsu against him, all to no effect. That was the power of a tailed beast that I alone could never hope to stand against. Yet we were somehow hoping that Sasuke could. Of course, if everything went well, Gaara should have no desire to unleash his tailed beast. My concern was if he even had a choice. You know, the Kazekage suddenly said, catching my attention. As I turned to regard him, I realized he had been staring back at me. My son tells me the other night he had been attacked by some unknown assailant. Apparently the fire produced in the attack was no small feat, something only a jonin could be capable of, I imagine. There was no way. Had he seen me that night? Or was it, could he be testing me to see if I would make a mistake and reveal myself? I swallowed my nerves, holding the Kazekage's gaze with my Sharingan. That so? I asked. Interesting, I heard from Naruto that he was attacked by a wave of sand. It would seem someone was targeting our shinobi before their matches. If you like, after this is over we can set up a joint inquiry to see if we can get to the bottom of those incidents. It was a bluff, of course. No doubt by saying that much I was also exposing myself, but I had to gamble on the possibility he didn't want that coming to light just as much as I did. For several tense moments, the Kazekage held my gaze. It might be the longest anyone ever willingly looked straight into my Sharingan. Yet he wasn't the least bit anxious about it at all. As expected of one of the Gakage. Finally, he turned away and refocused his gaze down below. No, that won't be necessary, he said, relenting. It would appear no harm befell either my son or your student. So I think we can put those incidents to rest for the time being. It would look like I pulled that off. For now anyways. I couldn't help but wonder what he had hoped to accomplish by bringing it up now of all times, however. It truly felt like he had just been trying to gauge my reaction. But to what end? Down below, Sasuke suddenly leapt back as the fight began. Sand had already burst out from the gourd on Gaara's back, but it didn't chase after him. It would appear it had simply come out as a defense measure for now. Even so, if Gaara wasn't going to be the first to attack, then Sasuke was. Pulling out two shuriken, Sasuke threw them at Gaara. The sand quickly reacted without a single seal of any kind, moving in front of Gaara and forming a type of poorly crafted sand clone that caught the shuriken. Sasuke wasn't far behind his shuriken, already charging straight for Gaara and his clone. A wave of sand burst from the clone in direct response to this charge. This didn't slow Sasuke for even a second, who jumped high in the air, leaping clear over the attacking sand. The clone aimed the recently caught shuriken and threw them at the airborne Uchiha. Unable to dodge, Sasuke threw his own, the projectiles colliding midair. The immediate danger out of the way, Sasuke fell towards the clone, spinning his body and unleashing a powerful kick that blew away the clone's arms. Sasuke landed on his hands, spinning around and coming to his feet in one fluid motion. He didn't stop there, continuing with his spin until he came back around, thrusting at the clone with his entire forearm. Unlike before, there wasn't enough power to completely blow through it, and sand began to creep around his arm, trapping him in place. The first instinct might be to panic, but Sasuke pushed that fear down and instead jabbed with his free arm, blasting through the clone's entire head and freeing himself. Now there was nothing between him and Gaara. Sasuke closed the remaining distance and swung again. Just as he was centimeters from Gaara's face, sand faster than the eye could track popped from the gourd and formed a protective wall in front of its master. Gaara himself had yet to even blink, simply allowing the sand to defend him on his own. At this moment, Sasuke smirked, as if he had been waiting for this exact situation. He turned on his heel, suddenly disappearing from the spot he was standing in. Gaara didn't even have time to realize he was gone before Sasuke appeared behind him, slamming his fist into Gaara's exposed cheek. The sand ninja was sent flying, the sand from his gourd forming a buffer that caught his fall and helped him back to his feet. While it looked like Sasuke's fist had connected, that actually appeared to not be the case. Gaara's face was cracked, sand falling from the hit area, a type of sand armor. Sasuke didn't appear worried, taking a battle stance I had recently seen, because it was the same one guy used. Kakashi must have used his Sharingan to mimic the movements and show Guy's fighting style to Sasuke, who then copied it with his own Sharingan. That was the only way he could possibly be using such perfect imagery of a stance he otherwise wouldn't have seen before now. Kakashi knew the only way through Gaara's first line of defense was speed. As expected of my rival. I bet this was just eating up Guy, however. Knowing his style was being used like this. Now there was just getting through that sand armor. Sasuke smirked, beckoning Gaara forward with the hand he had extended. "Come," he said. When Gaara didn't move immediately, he frowned, body bracing for action. "If you won't, then I'll just come at you." He was off like a rocket, immediately closing the distance between them. Gaara's sand was too slow, unable to catch Sasuke as he simply breezed right around the side of it. Catching him from behind wasn't going to go so easily the second time, however, and the sand was already moving to intercept him from the rear as well. Sasuke wasn't just quick on his feet, but nimble as well. He twisted around the slower sand, easily getting by the thinning defense to unleash a powerful kick that connected with Gaara's lower chin. Gaara was once again sent flying, only to be caught and stood up by his sand. The armor had yet to break. Despite that, Sasuke once again stopped and resumed his stance. He must have understood that a single attack at a time wasn't enough to break the armor, so why? If I had to guess, I would say this was because it was a hastily done decision. There was no way Sasuke could work himself up to Lee's level of stamina in just a month. So even if he could temporarily match his speed, there was no way he could maintain it for long. The same could also likely be said about Gaara. That sand armor. It was exuding an incredibly high amount of chakra, which might be fine for a Jinchuriki to maintain, but even if it was Naruto, it wouldn't be something he could maintain for very long. That meant it was a last resort type of defense. As things stood, he couldn't just take it down. Not with Sasuke's bursts of speed a potential risk. That meant this was going to be a battle of stamina, although unlikely the long one. "I'll tear that armor right off you." Sasuke was on the offensive again. He was running circles around Gaara, looking for the slightest chink in the sand that surrounded and protected him. He must have seen one, jumping in and ducking under the spinning sand to land right in front of Gaara. He delivered another kick, catching Gaara by the strap of his gourd before he could fly back this time. Then he pulled Gaara forward, right into his rising knee. That was as far as he could go, unable to keep up a consecutive attack longer than those two simple blows. The sand around them closed in, and Sasuke was the one to leap away this time, placing himself at a safe distance. Gaara collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. It would appear the sand armor had taken its toll on him. Sasuke, while certainly winded, appeared to be faring much better. He knew not to overexert himself with those attacks, and knowing his limit was what would allow him to continue to dominate this fight so long as nothing changed. Something his opponent must have also realized. Gaara weaved a single hand seal. The sand around him rose up, encircling him inside a cocoon. An all too familiar-looking cocoon to me. It was this form in which I had first met him in. There was no way he couldn't possibly intend to unleash his tailed beast here. Right now? With this timing? Sasuke had no way of knowing the danger he was charging into, simply sprinting forward in an attempt to catch Gaara before he completely sealed himself away. Even with his new speed he was too slow, punching at the solid sand covering the area Gaara's eye had just been looking out from. Spikes shot out from the sand, stabbing at the intruder, but Sasuke leapt back in time to avoid serious injury. Blood oozed from several open scratches he had received, but it would appear none of them had cut too deeply. He would be fine for now, and the sand wasn't pressing the attack. As it was, there was no way for Sasuke to get at his opponent either. This kind of situation would have been ideal for the strategy one came up with for Naruto, but there was no way Sasuke could ever sustain such an attack with his chakra levels. So then, what was it Kakashi came up with for this scenario? Knowing him, it had to be something. Sasuke's Sharingan flared to life, activating for the first time since the match began. I noticed that he had achieved all 3 Tomo already, despite his young age. He was even younger than I was when I first activated my own. Of course, the Uchiha incident had been quite traumatic for someone as young as him, so he awakened it from a very early age in his life. He charged at the sand cocoon, throwing 3 kunai as he ran. The kunai struck at the shield from the front as Sasuke put on a burst of speed to hit it in the rear at the same time. Neither attack was any good, the kunai being knocked away and Sasuke forced to retreat before the spikes emerging from the cocoon could spear him. He somersaulted into the air, coming down on top, but even that proved fruitless as his kick bounced off pointlessly. Sasuke was left with no choice but to retreat just outside of range of the cocoon's offensive zone. He looked to consider his options, but at the moment it really didn't seem like there was anything he could do. I don't think there was a genin alive in the village capable of getting through that shield as it was. What was more terrifying was what might emerge from it. This wasn't the time to just stand around and watch, but I couldn't just jump in right now either. If I interrupted things as they were, I would just be putting the village in trouble. Sasuke seemed to have an idea, and before I could decide what to do he retreated to the wall of the arena, scaling more than halfway up by sticking to it with the chakra gathered beneath his feet. He then ran through several hand seals that I didn't recognize at first, but it was only when he took his stance I knew exactly what he was about to do. If it was that technique, then maybe there was a chance. One way or the other, we were about to find out. Chakra built up in the palm of Sasuke's hand to the point it became visible. Sparks of electricity danced and tiny bolts of lightning began to fly off that chakra. The frequency at which it hummed became louder and louder until I'm sure those in the crowd could hear it. The chakra pierced a hole in the wall just below where he was holding it. All without even thrusting it yet. That's how strong this technique was. He took off, running down the side of the wall, leaving a trail of broken cement as he went. So this was why Kakashi had really been upping his speed so much over the past month. Not just to get around Gaara's defense, but to properly unleash this technique. Sasuke hit the ground without slowing down and the chakra continued to build even now. The jutsu had become so loud even we could hear it, the chorus of 1,000 birds. Kakashi had become known as the copy ninja while using my eye, but this was his true legacy. The only technique he had ever created. And now he had passed it on to Sasuke. Chidori. Sasuke called out the attack's name, dodging the sand spikes that attempted to ward him off. He thrust forward, the spear of electric chakra piercing Gaara's once impenetrable sand. Complete silence followed that strike, the sound of chirping birds disappearing as the attack deactivated. Whether or not it had been successful, it was too early to tell. Had Sasuke managed to pierce all the way through, or was even Kakashi's ultimate technique not enough to counter all that sand? I didn't have to wait for long to get my answer. My blood. A scream tore out from the cocoon. A blood-curdling, pain scream that signaled the beginning of the conflict to follow. Gaara! The Kazekage called, leaping from his seat to land on the roof of the audience stands just below us. No one, including myself, had been able to move fast enough to stop him. It was too late to catch him now unless I unveiled the ability of Mangekyo Sharingan. When I weighed the risk of doing that against the danger Sasuke might be put in, facing down a Jinchuriki and a Kage at the same time, there really was no choice. I had already failed so many of the Uchiha clan, I wasn't about to allow harm to come to any more of them if I had the power to stop it. My Mangekyo Sharingan whirled to life, the world around me distorting and being replaced. The Kazekage skid to a halt, eyes widening as I appeared directly in front of him. He turned back around to check behind him, glancing up at where I had surely just been only moments before. Only I was no longer there next to the Hokage. I was here in front of him. This was the undeniable truth, but he couldn't accept it. After all, the only one to be this fast before would have been. Now that I think about it, you and Hatake Kakashi were once students under the Leaf's yellow flash. He surmised, looking back at me. It would seem he was under the misconception that my sensei's Flying Thunder God Jutsu and my Kamui were one and the same. A misconception I wasn't about to correct him on. It was more beneficial to me this way. Move out of my way, he demanded, staring me down but not daring to take a step forward. It's you that needs to return to his seat, Kazekage-sama. I responded, planting my feet more firmly in place. I understand that it is your son who is wounded, but even you must know that I cannot simply allow you to get involved just for that. If anything, it was ridiculous that he would attempt to save his son after all the people he had already killed during the course of these exams. Ridiculous and hypocritical. Not that I believed Sasuke posed any lethal danger to Gaara as it was to begin with. You fool! The Kazekage spat back at me, glowering beneath his ceremonial hat. If you were the one there that night, then you know why this is a bad thing. To think you would assume a shinobi of my status would cry out for something as insubstantial as familial bonds. He had me there. I didn't know why Gaara transforming now of all times was a bad thing. It would appear the jig was up too and he had seen me there that night. Despite all this, I couldn't just allow him to go down there and do as he pleased. Family might not mean as much to you, but I'm not about to let you near Sasuke, who is like a little brother to me. I might have been exaggerating a little bit, but he was family nonetheless. Although I was taking a huge calculated risk here, standing up to one of the Gakage like this, and a supposed ally of ours no less. There is no value in shinobi like you. It looked like the Kazekage was done trading words, slowly raising his hands in preparation for whatever kind of jutsu it was he had prepared. I tensed my body, preparing my own jutsu just in case I needed to make a quick dodge. Before either of us could move, we sensed it. Down below us was the activation of a massive genjutsu. One large enough to capture the whole spectating audience. The chakra signatures of absolutely everyone went completely erratic, but from above it was impossible to tell what kind of genjutsu they were being put under. At that moment I made the mistake of looking down to try and make sense of things somehow through my Sharingan. The second my attention was off him was the moment the Kazekage struck. It was as if he had been aware of the genjutsu, which in hindsight made sense. If he was in cahoots with whoever the caster was, he had no need to know what was happening, unlike myself who was completely in the dark. Something which he took complete advantage of. I was left with no choice but to activate the ability of my Mangekyo Sharingan, the Kazekage's golden kunai slipping right through my eye socket where he had just stabbed at me. If he was surprised by my ability to become incorporeal, he didn't show it. Instead, he used it to his advantage, slipping completely through me and running past as if I wasn't even there. I'd caught up to him once, however, I could do it again. Only I never got the chance. Wind Blade. Baki created a cyclone of wind in the palm of his hand. Dance of the Camellia. Kimimaro pulled a piece of his bone from his shoulder, the white cartilage taking the shape of a long dagger. Waterfall Cutting Strike. Shibuki created a sword of pure water. All three of them attacked me at once, stabbing at me with their respective blades. If it was just Baki, then I would have understood the Sand Ninja coming to the aid of his leader. But for Ninja from Sound and Waterfall to attack as well? My worst fears were being realized, all three of these villages having teamed up against us. None of their attacks met their marks. I had yet to deactivate my jutsu from earlier, and so they all just slipped right through me. It didn't stop there. The three of them had come at me in a pincer movement, placing one another in each other's crossfire. So it came down to a battle of skill and who could react first. A battle that Shibuki lost. He was cut down immediately by Kimimaro's bone sword and Baki's blade of wind. As Shibuki's flesh was torn apart, I immediately recognized the pattern of the fatal wound. The one who had killed Heiei that night, it had been none other than Baki. I had no time to make use of this information, nor was I about to let some petty need for revenge drive me to take him down. At the moment, I had far bigger things to worry about. Such as the fact that in my haste to get between the Kazekage and Sasuke, I had unintentionally left the Hokage surrounded by enemies unattended. I hadn't seen when she moved, but Mume had taken up position behind the third, kunai position to his throat. She jumped for the roof, forcing him to go along with her. I began to activate the teleportation ability of my Mangekyo to go after them, but was a bit too slow. Katan, Searing Migraine Jutsu. Two masks attached by wires popped out from Kakuzu's back. The red mask unleashed a ball of pure fire right at me. If it was just that, and at the speed it was traveling, I might have been in time to use Kamui. Futon, Wind Pressure Jutsu. The second mask unleashed a bullet of wind that enhanced the flames, increasing its speed and widening its reach simultaneously. There was no time for me to teleport, and I was forced to maintain my ability to remain incorporeal. If only I could use these techniques concurrently, it wouldn't be a problem, but Kamui only had the ability to use one or the other at a time. As I was engulfed in the flames, I took the opportunity to prepare chakra for a separate jutsu. Just as the flames went out, I unleashed that molded chakra. Moku Bunshin no Jutsu. Two clones of wood formed from the flesh of the Zetsu cells on my right arm. The wood bursting out tore through my jacket, shredding the material. Baki and Kimimaro had managed to jump out of the way in time, but Shibuki, who still might have been able to be saved, was burned alive by his own leader. When the attack ended, he was nothing more than a burnt hunk of flesh barely recognizable as a former human. My wood clones jumped forward, one of them going for Baki and the other for Kimimaro. I hadn't molded them with much chakra, so I didn't expect they would hold them off for long. A little bit of time was plenty. I needed to get to the Hokage and Mume, whom Kakuzu was also now chasing after, likely to offer them cover support. Before that, however, my eye fell on the representatives of the only village not yet to attack me. Yahiko and Konan had taken up defensive positions back-to-back of one another. They were alone now on the balcony that had otherwise just served as a gathering of peace between the 5 villages. Yahiko must have felt my gaze, because no sooner did I look at him did he turn to regard me. "Is this what you meant earlier when you said you hoped that pain had taught us all the same lesson?" He called out to me, voice filled with mockery. He didn't appear surprised by these turn of events, yet I don't think they had anything to do with them. My instinct about them had been right. The hidden ring was not involved in this attack. "No, it is not." I shook my head. "And I'm truly sorry you got involved in this attack." I like to believe I meant those words. The Hokage needed my help, but before that I somehow got the feeling that this was even more important. I can take the two of you somewhere safe for the time being. You have no need to get involved any further in this conflict between the other villages. You think we'll let you?" Baki yelled, cutting down my wood clone with his sword. At the same moment, Kimimaro had just dispatched my other one. Both of them closed in on me from the sides. I had no more time to talk, already activating my jutsu to dodge their attacks. Only this time there was no need. Paper Shuriken Jutsu. Conan threw a volley of Paper Shuriken. Suetun, Jetstream Jutsu. Yahiko inhaled before releasing a beam of water so precise it cleanly cut through the roof tiles as it flew towards us. For a second I thought I was about to have to start evading their attacks too. Except I was wrong, their jutsu aimed to intercept the two already attacking me, not myself. Baki and Kimimaro were forced to retreat, unable to close the gap between themselves and me. I again looked up at Yahiko, this time confused but grateful. He nodded me forward, up towards the rooftop where Kakuzu, Mume, and the Hokage had disappeared to. "Don't get the wrong idea," he said. "I simply want to see what kind of answer you're going to give me afterwards. So for now we'll cover you while you go do your job." "Thank you," I said. That short phrase was all I had time for. Baki and Kimimaro weren't about to just let me leave. Yahiko and Conan jumped down and I raced past them, leaving the now 4 clashing shinobi to my rear. I didn't turn around to see what was becoming of the battle. The only thing for me right now was forward. I jumped up, landing on the balcony I had just been at. Then, with one more enhanced kick, I flew up to the roof where the Hokage and our enemies now were. The moment I cleared the edge and 4 different types of elemental jutsu flew at me. Lighting, fire, wind, and water all attempting to turn me into mere nothingness. As before, but the power of my dojutsu made me impervious to all these attacks and I stepped harmlessly past them. What kind of power? Kakuzu asked me the very thing I was now desiring to ask him. I knew he must have some kind of incredible ability to live as long as he had, but this, it was far beyond expectations. For monsters composed of the wires I had seen earlier had sprouted from Kakuzu's back. Each one was unique in shape and wore a different type of mask. It had been those things that attacked me just now, unleashing all those different elements at once. Were they some kind of jutsu or entirely different beings with their own consciousness? Even my Sharingan couldn't figure it out. From inside those wires something shifted and in the next moment 4 more bodies broke out from within them. For a second I thought the bodies had split apart further, but I realized that wasn't the case. For Sound Ninja had been hidden inside the wires, concealing their presence in Kakuzu's body the whole time. They leapt free in this moment to be around their leader who stood at the pinnacle of the slanted roof, kunai still to the Hokage's throat. Above me, a squad of umbu flew over my head. Kakuzu was too slow to react to them, still trying to figure out how I had been dodging his jutsu up until now. It would seem like even if I didn't move, they would be able to save the Hokage. They outnumbered the enemy now, after all. Although numbers appeared not to matter to the Sound Ninja. The 4 of them had taken up positions in a rectangular pattern around Mume and the Hokage, facing out and not towards any enemy in particular. Their chakra all flared at once, syncing up as they prepared some joint jutsu. 4-point barrier. They shouted together, planting their hands on the roof tiles. 4 violet-colored pillars of light shot up from in front of them before those pillars formed horizontal lines that then connected. In a matter of moments, they had managed to trap Mume and the Hokage inside a purple barrier of some kind. Too fast for the umbu to react, they all attempted to just brute force their way through the barrier. Every single one of them bounced off of it, catching fire as they were repelled and burnt alive almost instantly. As it stood, the Hokage wasn't getting out and no one was getting in to help him. Well, almost no one. I could likely get through it with my jutsu without any kind of problem. The only issue was with Kakuzu, who was in front of me. Dodging past him wouldn't pose a threat, but the problem was, what did I do about him after I busted the Hokage out of there? I might just be pulling him out of the frying pan and into the fire for all I knew. No, before that, wasn't this strange? What could Mume, some unknown kunoichi, possibly stand to gain by trapping herself in a barrier with the strongest ninja of the entire Hidden Leaf village? It looked like her allies couldn't assist while maintaining the barrier, so it wasn't a numbers solution. She had to be insane to think she was a match for him one-on-one. That, or she had faith in some really vulgar jutsu she would no doubt employ. Thinking about all this stuff and possible consequences would have to come later. For now, I needed to get through Kakuzu and back up the third. Fortunately for me, my own backup arrived just before I could move. Obito. Kakashi and Guy landed to either side of me, already posed for combat. What happened? Guy asked, glancing between me and the opponents in front of us, as well as the barrier behind him. I messed up. I admitted simply. I let them get between me and Hokage-sama. The Sound Ninjas trapped him in a barrier with their leader, and Kakuzu, the Waterfall Village head, is the one blocking our path. I don't know what kind of jutsu it is he's using, but he's capable of at least 4 types of elemental manipulation. Kakashi and Guy both glanced at me out of surprise before redoubling their attention in front of us. So what's the plan? Kakashi asked. It would seem the Sound, Sand, and Waterfall have all teamed up. They put most of the audience to sleep with Genjutsu. That at least explained to me what happened earlier. We came to back you up as soon as we saw them take Hokage-sama, but... He glanced once more at the barrier with his Sharingan eye. Should we combine powers and use that jutsu to take the barrier down, or... I shook my head. I don't think it will go down that easily. Even if we use that. No, I'm the only one that can probably get in and out of the barrier. Even the Umbu were repelled by it. I nodded to the still flaming bodies on the other side. Got it. So basically, Guy folded his arms and pressure so powerful it shattered the roof tiles all around him rolled off his body. We just need to handle this Kakuzu guy while you rescue Hokage-sama? Not that Hokage-sama needs any rescuing, but yeah. Basically that. I agreed to Guy's assessment. There were still too many gaps in my information, but for now I had to put everything going on behind me and below to the others. Kakashi and Guy were no doubt thinking the same thing. We had our first priority already laid out in front of us. The only thing left to do was move. Kakuzu seemed to be in agreement. He hadn't just been letting us talk out of the kindness of his heart. He was simply being cautious of my jutsu, no doubt using the time we had given him to try and figure out the properties and limits in which it operated. Without further testing my powers, he wasn't going to figure that out, and so the masks all went on the offensive at once. 4 more elemental attacks came flying at us. I chose to ignore them, pushing forward with the knowledge that none of them could hurt me so long as I stayed on the defensive. Kakashi and Guy weren't so lucky, but they didn't have to worry for the moment as Kakuzu focused all the attacks solely on me. This was going to cost him, as he just underestimated the Leaf's infamous copy ninja and majestic green beast. What? Kakuzu didn't have time to even block as Guy flew past me, striking at his real body with a punch so powerful it could obliterate the whole building we were standing on. Kakashi, meanwhile, was already targeting the masks with jutsu that ran counter to the elements they seemed set to release. I ran straight forward, and through all of this, not a single attack from either side grazing me in the slightest. With Kakuzu now behind me, the only thing left to clear was the barrier. Once again, it really felt like I had taken the long way around to get where I needed to be, in this case next to the Hokage. I always did end up where I was going eventually, at least. As I expected, even the barrier was no hindrance to my Mangekyo Sharingan, and I slipped right through it like it hadn't even been there. How did you dash? Mumei yelled as soon as she took notice of me, the kunai still held up to the throat of the Hokage. He had yet to attempt to free himself from her grip, although I had no doubt if he wanted it he could have already. There was no need to make him do that for himself now that I was here. The momentary shock cost Mumei any kind of opportunity to counterattack. I crossed the remaining distance in the span of a second. Hokage-sama! I shouted, jumping in the air and swinging my foot in a kick. He already knew what I was going for, not flinching in the slightest despite the fact that my foot was flying right for his face. What are you? Mumei never finished that exclamation, my foot catching her in the mouth and sending her flying backwards. She hit the tiles of the roof with a loud thump, body temporarily going limp. There was no way for her to have predicted the attack, as my foot slipped through the Hokage's head like he wasn't even there. The moment my foot had passed, I let go of the ability maintaining my incorporeality, allowing me to strike her. Forgive me, Hokage-sama. I dropped to one knee and rested my forearm on the other as I prostrated myself before the one I was supposed to be protecting. I made an error in judgment. I never should have left your side. No, Obito. He shook his head, not once taking his eye from the enemy. Mumei was beginning to stand, not looking like she took any damage from my kick at all. You did well to make it in here and back me up. It was better that we played to the enemy's hand a little. It allowed me to realize what is really going on. Sir? I asked. Mumei was now on her feet and glaring at the two of us. So I also resumed standing, settling into a more defensive stance. I didn't know what kind of abilities this woman had, but she was confident enough to take on the Hokage by herself. So even if it was hubris, she couldn't just be some weakling. I needed to be ready to get the Hokage out of here at any moment. Although it looked like he had no intention to leave himself. That isn't just anyone. It is Orochimaru. He said undoubtedly. If anyone was to recognize his former student, no matter what form he had taken, it was going to be him. There was no more time for me to be surprised, and if you considered everything up until now, it made a certain amount of sense. Orochimaru was the centerpiece of this invasion, and it stood to reason that he would believe himself capable of taking on his former teacher. So if anything, many of the pieces now fell into place with this information. Mumei no, Orochimaru, still in the disguise of the person known as Mumei, if that was ever even a real person, began cackling. He reached up, grabbing at the chin and peeling back the feminine flesh to reveal pasty white skin, not much unlike the right side of my torso. The shape of his body contorted, the womanly curves taking the shape of a lanky old man. In mere moments, Orochimaru took the form of the man I remembered him as, back when he tried to kidnap me upon my return to the village in my youth. At last you finally realized it was me, Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru hissed ecstatically. I was so hurt when you didn't even realize who I was back down there. So much so I thought about killing you there instead of following the plan. Despite saying such things, he didn't look wounded at all. Mere sarcasm, completely bereft of any respect he should have for the man who taught him everything he knew. His ignorance lit a furnace in my gut. I lost my sensei, the former Hokage, due to my actions. Was he about to commit the same mistake? You've fallen to a new low, Orochimaru. I cursed at him, unable to believe this man used to be a former teammate of my current master. It's no longer enough for you to target children like myself back then and Sasuke now, but you've widened your madness to encompass the whole village. As Orochimaru turned to regard me, his eyes lacked any of the warmth they held well addressed his teacher. Silence, Obito. You, one so heavy with sins that have torn apart the village once before, have no right or reason to speak to me in such a manner. His words struck me like an arrow to the heart. My vision swam and I thought for a moment I might collapse back down to my knees. Was he aware of what I had done? That shouldn't be possible. No one but that man and I should have any knowledge of the true events that unfolded that night, and that man was no more, meaning it was only I. Furthermore, you insult the Hokage by barging in here and getting in our way. Orochimaru wasn't done with me yet. You think someone such as yourself can stand in the same arena as us? I, who was once a candidate for 4th Hokage, along with your sensei. The level of this battle is out of your league, worm. He was right, of course. I had no business being here. If anything, I would only hold the third back in a real fight between these two. Yet despite this, it was the Hokage's turn to chuckle. Now. It would appear that your information-gathering skills have dulled, my former student. The snake Sannin snarled, clearly taking the insult to his knowledge or lack thereof personally. You are looking at the man I have been considering for my replacement, the 5th Hokage. What? Orochimaru and I exclaimed together. His surprise was a given, considering he knew nothing of my true abilities up until now. I suspected that Jiraiya was to thank for keeping my training so under wraps these last few years, and he would know how to prevent his former teammate from discovering more about his own student. As for me, while it was true that it felt like many things were trying to push me back towards the idea of pursuing the position, to know I was already being considered for it was another matter entirely. Is it truly so surprising? The Hokage gave a satisfied smirk, although which one of us he was talking to I had no idea. Obito is the student of the 4th and he carries his ideals. Minato and I spoke about it often, but he also desired for Obito to one day have the position. It's for this reason that Jiraiya has taken on training Obito for the past 5 years. Also he could return and fulfill that destiny. So then even my master knew about this? No, rather than knew about, it would be more accurate to say he had been preparing me for it. It would seem you really have gone senile, you old fool. Orochimaru only appeared to be getting angrier by the minute. While he had at first seemed to be having so much fun before I arrived here, every sentence served to further foul his mood until it looked like now he might burst at any moment. If you truly think someone like him is worthy of the title, why don't we see how he stacks up against his predecessors? There was no way, he couldn't possibly mean to. Summoning Edo Tensei. It was exactly as I feared, Orochimaru slamming his hands on the ground as he began the unholy summoning. 2 coffins popped out of the ground in front of him. The one on the left marked with and the one on the right marked with a character. There was only one possible thing that could be in these 2 coffins. The lids fell open, revealing the preserved corpses of the 1st and 2nd Hokage inside. Yet despite being corpses they began to move, their creaking bodies walking them out of the coffins they lied in and making their way ever so slowly towards us. It's been a while, Saru. The 1st, Senju Hashirama, greeted the 3rd almost jovially, his tone completely unfit for the situation. As the legends about him suggested, he certainly was a carefree guy. To be chipper even in this circumstance, though, it was beyond expectations. You've aged quite a bit. The 2nd, Senju Tobirama, in contrast, seemed to be taking stock of the situation. This jutsu to revive the dead would have been his creation, as such neither one of them seemed too surprised to have been brought back in such a horrific form. I never thought we would meet under such circumstances. The 3rd said. I could only imagine the kind of pain and suffering seeing his former predecessors in such a state could be doing to him. Yet as expected of the one who held the title of 3rd Hokage, he didn't let a single one of those expressions show. He knew that despite the fact these were the souls of his predecessors, they weren't themselves. Orochimaru was no doubt suppressing their personalities and powers. If he didn't, there was no way he could control them. The 2nd, who created the jutsu aside, that was just the pure raw power of the 1st Hokage. It would appear even in this repressed state, their personalities slightly shined through. The coffins behind them toppled over and the 2 former Hokage turned around, glancing back at the one audacious enough to summon them. So this is the one who managed to summon us, using my own jutsu? The second questioned, folding his arms and giving Orochimaru the once-over. He didn't look impressed, which spoke volumes for what his own true power could only be. I guess that means our opponent is the two of you. The first looked from the third, eyes slowly trailing over towards me. Uchiha? He asked, glancing directly into my Sharingan without fear. If anything, it was the opposite, and I was the one that felt the extreme pressure under his gaze. That's right, and listen to this. Orochimaru took a couple steps towards his puppets, holding up kunai with special red tags attached to them. Sarutobi-sensei is saying that this Uchiha with cursed blood is to become the next Hokage. Unbelievable, isn't it? He stuck one of the kunai into the back of the first's neck. Someone from the same clan as Madara, who was ultimately responsible for your death, Lord First. Doesn't that make your blood boil? Next he stuck one of the kunai in the second's head. What about you, Lord Second? He asked. No one hated the Uchiha more than you did. I bet you just can't stand the thought of one of them becoming Hokage. He cackled as he said those words, but neither of the predecessors responded. It would appear those kunai made them unable to. He was taking complete control of their emotions now and turning them into pure killing machines. Obito, get ready for battle. The third threw away his ceremonial gown and hat, revealing the battle armor underneath. It would appear he had been prepared for this outcome. Maybe not this specifically, but a battle breaking out today hadn't seemed out of the question when it began. Orochimaru formed a seal, molding his chakra to complete his jutsu. It was now or never, so I chose now. No, Hokage-sama. Get ready to run. I grabbed onto his shoulder, already activating Kamui before it was too late. The second was capable of the same flying thunder god jutsu as my teacher was. So if I didn't warp us out of here now, before the jutsu was complete and he went on the offensive, it would be too slow. This was to say nothing of the first, who possessed natural speed and power that would make him able to close this paltry distance in time without the need of any jutsu. Wadash. Orochimaru had no idea of my Mangekyo Sharingan's second ability. True, he had seen me use it to get in front of the Kazekage earlier, but there was no way he could have known I could use it in this situation. Otherwise, I would have used it to get in here in the first place. But because I hadn't, he no doubt assumed it meant I couldn't for some reason, let alone take someone I was in contact with along with me when I warped. An assumption I was about to make him pay for. The world bent away, and a second later I was back in front of Kakuzu, outside of the barrier where we had just been. Hokage-sama. Guy and Kakashi disengaged from Kakuzu, jumping back to join us at our side. Kakuzu didn't pursue them, instead staring in shock at the Hokage's sudden appearance. He then spun around, trying to make sense of what was happening in the barrier behind him. All he would see was Orochimaru, alone with his puppets. Obito, what have you done? The third predictably asked me. If we're outside the barrier, Orochimaru will turn my predecessors on the rest of the village. Everyone will get caught up in the battle with them. Forgive me, Hokage-sama. I inclined my head, but there was no actual apology in my tone. However, that is exactly the point. Even if you and I can take them by ourselves, and that is a big if, we should rely on the strength of everyone else. They surely would wish for the same. No one desires to see you fight your predecessors. That's too heartbreaking for anyone. Maybe I was speaking above my pay grade here, but Minato-sensei had always preached teamwork to us. I wasn't about to throw away his lessons now. I still do not really understand, but it is exactly as Obito says. Guy, back me up immediately. Please allow us to assist you, no matter what it is, Hokage-sama. Actually, let's first figure out what exactly it is we're dealing with. Kakashi wasn't as willing to throw himself into the unknown like Guy or myself. A trait that had saved us many times before. We need to trade information while we have the chance. Yes, you're right. The Hokage relented, not looking happy about it, but he seemed to have accepted our logic. At the very least, it was too late to do anything about it. I had already made the choice for him, which I felt was kind of fair, since he had gone and made that earlier proclamation without me. Now we were even, as far as I was concerned. This Kakuzu guy appears to be immortal. Kakashi started. At least partially so. Guy and I killed him twice each already, and yet he's still not going down. Instead, he ripped the hearts out from the burning umbu outside the barrier. I suspect that's how he is staying alive and moving those creatures. By replenishing the hearts we killed already. It would seem we were dealing with immortals no matter where we turned. He's not the only undead guy we're going up against anymore. I nodded to the barrier just as it came down. The four-sound ninja leapt forward, landing next to Kakuzu to back him up. Orochimaru also approached us, walking slowly with his head down and banged covering his eyes. Coming along with him were his two puppets. Their dash, it was hard to tell who was more surprised between Kakashi and Guy. Of course, I wasn't exactly over my own shock either, and I had seen them get summoned. The first and second took their place in the lineup of monsters before us. To make a quick head count, there was the seemingly immortal Kakuzu, and the four masks that had split from his body. The four-sound ninja, Orochimaru's personal henchman, who had just cast a pretty high-level barrier jutsu before this. The revived first and second Hokage turned against the village they helped create. And leading them all was the snake Sannin, Orochimaru himself. To say he didn't look happy was probably an understatement. "Uchiha Obito, you bastard!" He hissed at me, slit eyes so venomous I thought he might poison me with his stare alone. "Do you know how satisfying it is to hurt the person you once called master?" he asked, although I don't know how he expected me to be able to respond to such a twisted question. "I prepared these two just for that purpose, but if you would steal that from me, then I'll just turn them on the village itself." TCH, I clicked my teeth, not believing him for a second. It was exactly as he said. I had plenty of sins I still needed to atone for. However, this definitely wasn't one of them. You were going to turn them on the village no matter what. That's just the kind of sick freak you are, I said. Even I wasn't so pessimistic as to believe this could somehow also be my fault. "Perhaps you're right, but that will be for after you all die," Orochimaru yelled. In response to that, the surge of chakra in front of us was so great that it washed over us like a tsunami. All 12 entities in front of us flared their chakra, preparing their jutsu at once. Even if we all prepared a defensive jutsu in time, it wouldn't be enough to withstand the attack they were preparing for us. Nature elements of every kind flew from the mouths of Kakuzu's monsters. The sound ninja each unleashed unique jutsu of their own that got instantly added to the mix and got lost in the shuffle. Orochimaru himself unleashed a large snake that barreled towards us. The first released his famed Mokutan jutsu, and the second a swift current of water so large it looked like a tidal wave. All of these numerous attacks pooled together, forming a single massive concoction with the sole purpose of wiping us out. Susanoo. None of those attacks accomplished their task, instead being blocked by the red shield of Itachi's Susanoo. "It would appear we made it," he said, letting out a breath of relief. Standing next to him and holding him around the waist was Shisui. No doubt the only reason Itachi had been here in time to use his ultimate shield was because Shisui had used his hyperspeed to race them both here. "Sasuke?" I asked, knowing we only had a couple seconds before Orochimaru and the others realized what had happened. Itachi had been in the waiting area with the other tournament participants when everything started. Of course, the fact that he was here now could only mean Sasuke was safe. There was no other way he would abandon his brother. "Izumi is with him," Itachi said coolly, nodding in my general direction. His eyes never left the still continuing attack that battered his Susanoo. There was no way his shield would fall. His Susanoo had the Yata no Kagami, after all. Perhaps the strongest defensive jutsu in the world. Naruto and the other Leaf Genin are under her protection as well. Just before we left, Noara Rin had also joined them. That was good news. If Naruto and Rin were together, there wasn't anything to worry about in regards to the tailed beasts. No sooner did I have that damning thought than the worst immediately happened. The complete forms of the One Tail and Seven Tails emerged. It was the natural continuation of things if you thought about it logically. This must have been why Orochimaru would have sought to team up with the Sand and Waterfall specifically. This was also why Fu and Gaara had been pushed through to the final round. It was also likely the reason he sought Sasuke, but that would appear to not have gone his way. Even without him, the two-tailed beasts could inflict massive damage in a short amount of time. Even just being unleashed like this, the two massive monsters crumbled half the standing arena wall. Once they started rampaging, there was no way to know where the catastrophe would end. More than Orochimaru, more than the former Hokage, these two were the biggest single threat to the village right now. And there was only one way to stop them. Obito. Go to Naruto, now. The third ordered, voice leaving no room for question. Like it or not, he was right. I didn't want to leave my allies here fighting against these odds, but if Itachi and Shisui were here now, I could at least go with the confidence that they would see something done. Only a tailed beast was a match for another tailed beast. And Jiraiya had given me the key to Naruto's seal just weeks before this. Almost like he knew this was going to happen. I had to get to his side now, along with Rin. I nodded to Kakashi, silently promising him I would look after his student. Then the world around me bent away as I activated Kamui. Just like that, I left the battle behind. Orochimaru, the previous Hokage, all those other monsters posing as humans. In a split second, it was no longer any of my business. Nisan. Izumi threw her arms around me, wrapping me in a tight hug before I was even able to take in my surroundings. The easiest chakra signature for me to locate was my little sister's. More so than Naruto's, even more so than even Rin's, it was Izumi I could always find no matter what. I think it was because of how desperately I hunted for her in order to save her life during the Uchiha incident. I had never really forgotten her chakra signature after that, and without even really trying, I could be by her side in an instant. No matter where in the world I was. Izumi. I breathed a sigh of relief, inhaling the scent of her shampoo as I returned the hug. It wasn't something I was aware of, but I don't think I even had a moment to breathe before now. Things kept happening one after the other. That was far from over, but just holding my little sister in my arms allowed some of that tension to dissipate, even if just a little. Obito-senpai. Naruto's voice is what finally brought me back to reality, and I took stock of the situation. We were in a hallway. If I had to guess, it would be the one connecting the arena floor to the waiting room above us. A smart place to hole up, as they only had to guard the front and rear, making it easily defensible. I did a quick head count. Aside from Izumi in my arms and Naruto who had called out to me, there was Rin who was guarding the far end. Shino, Shikamaru, and Sasuke were all gathered in the middle, next to Naruto who had taken a couple steps towards Izumi and I. The entire ground trembled and shook, no doubt with every step taken by the tailed beasts only just outside. The ceiling above us began to creak and crack, and I was reminded of what had already become of half the walls here. We need to get outside. This place might collapse at any moment. I ordered. Putting them out in the open under the threat of possible projectile attack wasn't a great choice, but it was better than possibly getting them all crushed to death. As it was, there weren't many good choices left to us. Just bad or worse. Right. Izumi nodded, finally pulling away from me and turning to the gathered genin. You heard him, let's go. With a chorus of agreements from most of them and grumbling complaints from Shikamaru, the four genin set out towards the entrance to the arena grounds, following behind Izumi, who led the way. As they moved, I reached forward and grabbed Naruto by the sleeve to hold him slightly back. Sasuke also turned when he noticed his teammate lagging behind, but I nodded him forward silently. He looked for a moment like he wanted to say something, but Rin rested a hand on his back, gently pushing him towards the others. "What's up, Obito-senpai?" Naruto asked. For the moment I only shook my head. There would be time to explain it to him later, but I needed to get him out of earshot of the others. Naruto's generation didn't necessarily know about the nine-tailed demon fox or the fact that it was sealed inside him. Despite that, they were probably about to find out pretty soon here. All the same, I didn't want them to overhear me telling him about it until we made our move. For now, I just needed him and Rin close to me. "I'm glad you're okay," Rin said. She must have also realized at least somewhat what was happening outside. Even so, she hadn't been able to abandon Naruto. Or maybe she knew I was coming. She certainly hadn't been surprised by my sudden appearance. "Likewise," I said to her, reaching forward and grabbing her forearm briefly. Just enough to let her know I meant my words. Anything more intimate than that would have to come for later. We had a mission to do now and couldn't waste time with pleasantries. No matter how nice it would be to do just that right about now. Izumi had crouched down at the entranceway, holding a hand out behind her as she peeked out and scanned for any immediate threats. Not finding any, she waved us forward, directing the genin over to a piece of collapsed wall to take up a defensive position amongst the rubble. Shikamaru and Shino went first, no attacks coming. The moment Sasuke started to follow them, however, a barrage of kunai came flying from above. "Sasuke!" Izumi yelled in warning, already throwing a set of her own kunai to deflect the encroaching projectiles. Several loud clangs echoed, every single one of her weapons meeting their mark. Before the discarded blades even hit the ground, she was in front of Sasuke, a single kunai held up as she glared at where the attack came from. Sasuke, Shikamaru, and Shino all formed a protective circle, their backs all facing one another and forming a perfect defense with no blind spots. I had to admit, even for genin, they knew how to handle themselves and look out for one another. I figured it wasn't going to be that easy. An Umbu member wearing a cat mask flew down from above, landing not far from them. No, not a true member of the Umbu. Just someone that had killed one of their members and then stolen their uniform to disguise themselves. I was wondering where Sasuke was until now. "Seriously, you're making my job hard for me." He pulled back his mask, revealing himself. "Kabuto," I said. He wasn't someone I knew personally. Kakashi had caught him once already trying to take Sasuke after the events in the Forest of Death and had informed me that he was another subordinate of Orochimaru. Apparently a high-ranking one, to be trusted with such a task. "Leave him to us," Izumi shouted, nodding at Rin, Naruto, and I. She didn't just say herself, but us was the exact word she used. Apparently even she knew this wasn't an opponent she could fight while having to protect the genin to her back. They were going to have to contribute and earn their keep. That was just the kind of situation this was. You have something else to take care of, right? The tailed beasts continued to rampage in the background, getting further away now from the arena and closer to the more metropolitan areas of the village. She was exactly right. Time was running out for us if we were going to save as many lives as we could. So I nodded to her, sending Kabuto one last glare before I prepared Kamui. "No need to look at me like that." Kabuto just laughed, pushing up his glasses with one hand and waving farewell to us with the other. "I'm not crazy enough to think I can take two adult members of the Uchiha clan at the same time. Looks like luck is on my side and you have other business to attend to. Kick his ass, Izumi." It wasn't I, But Rin that said this line. Apparently, it wasn't just me that was rubbed the wrong way by this jerk and his confident, know-it-all smirk. Heh, you got it. Izumi's own smirk was the last thing I saw before I teleported the three of us away. I had no doubt they would all be fine. Kabuto may have thought he was getting lucky because I was leaving, but he was definitely underestimating Sasuke and the others in that case. A hard lesson he was about to learn. Whoa! Naruto let out a loud yelp, nearly slipping from the top of the tree I had teleported us to. We were in the middle of one of the village's numerous dense forests now, standing at the top of the tallest tree in the surrounding area. The tournament arena and thus rampaging tailed beasts were a considerable distance away. At least, they were for humans of our insignificant size. For something much bigger than us, however, it wouldn't be far at all. The hell is that? Naruto finally seemed to notice the rampaging tailed beasts, having gotten a grip on his footing and being able to take in our surroundings. That is our mission, I said glumly, doing my best to grin down at Naruto. It was strained at best, but I succeeded at least a little. You should be happy. Consider this an S-rank mission you're about to help us with. You can't be serious. Rin gripped my shoulder, pulling my attention to her. I could tell with just a glance how worried she was. Not for herself, but for her adoptive son, who I was about to put in harm's way. Not just against the enemy, but against the thing inside him too. He's not ready. If you need someone to fight the tailed beasts, then I can dash. You plan to take them both by yourself? I asked her, dead serious. Even she couldn't respond to that, knowing the truth of how impossible it was. She only had the three tails sealed inside her, and even if she was the perfect Jinchuriki that could freely control it, she was no match for the combined might of the one tail and seven tails together. Jiraiya gave me the key to Naruto's seal for this reason. We need to unleash the nine tails if we hope to save as many people as possible. Aren't you just going to put more people in danger? Rin retorted, shouting out at me. I've tried to help him reason with nine tails from inside his mind, and I'm telling you it can't be done. It's angry, so very angry. She looked down as if in defeat. You wouldn't possibly understand, but that fox is the very embodiment of human hatred. We have to try. I told her, begging her to see my reason. Why would my master have trusted me with this key if not to use it? He must have believed I could do something about nine tails, such as with my Sharingan dash. And I'm telling you it won't work. Rin cut me off. You will be overcome by its hatred if you try to sink to it with your Sharingan. Only someone equally evil could possibly hope to control it. Try as I might, those words just now shook me, and I felt the confidence I had been falsely putting forth in a bravado crack and crumble. It was exactly as that man had said, only someone who had cursed humanity could hope to understand the nine tails. Then what are we supposed to do? I bit at my lower lip, trying to think of another way. Maybe I should go back for Kakashi? It was true, if we were together we could use that and it might give us some kind of a chance. The problem was how long could we maintain the jutsu? It was almost definitely not enough to defeat a tailed beast. It's too early to decide whether or not we can't do it. Naruto suddenly shouted, surprising us both. Don't give up before we've even tried. I'm the man who is going to become Hokage, and Obito is my senpai who is walking the path ahead of me. The three of us together, we can definitely talk to Nine Tails and make him agree to help us. Naruto, I whispered in awe. That was an avenue I hadn't even considered. Ask the Nine Tails willingly for its cooperation? That was so outside the realm of possibility I had been incapable of considering it. Yet Naruto believed it could be done. In the same way he believed he could become Hokage, no, in the same way he believed we could become Hokage. Is it worth a shot? I asked, turning once again to Rin. She was the Jinchuriki here. and it had been her up until this point overseeing all matters in regards to Naruto's seal. If anyone knew whether or not it was possible, it was her. That's... Rin started to say and stopped. She closed her eyes as if to think. Only it wasn't like she was thinking at all, but rather communicating. That's right, she was asking the Three Tails. It wasn't just Rin, it was the two of them that formed the pair that created a perfect Jinchuriki. Such a thing wouldn't be possible if she didn't have some form of trust with the tailed beast inside of her. When she next opened her eyes, she nodded her head. "We can try," she said. It wasn't what I would call confident, but there was at least hope. With her permission, there was only one thing left to do. I nodded to Naruto, looking back down at him and into his blue eyes. "You ready?" I asked him, activating my Sharingan in preparation for entering his mind space. This would be the first time I had ever used it for such a purpose, but I had a fairly good idea of what it was I had to do. It was just like casting a Genjutsu. Only instead of an illusion, I was going to plant my consciousness inside Naruto's. At least, that was how I understood it to work. Let's do it. In contrast to the two of us, Naruto was the picture of confidence. He truly believed we could do it. He was its Jinchuriki, after all. Maybe he knew something about the fox that we didn't? I could only hope so and try to believe in that confidence of his. Because ready or not, this was happening. I was about to meet with the nine-tailed demon fox, the tailed beast that killed my sensei and made Naruto an orphan. That is the end of the video. Comment ramen if you got this far, and I will see you in the next video.